Imagine sitting in your living room when suddenly a book flies across the room, or standing in your kitchen as a cupboard slams shut on its own. Across the United States, countless families have faced poltergeist activity of violent, intelligent, and terrifying forces that make their homes feel like war zones. Tonight, we explore 25 real poltergeist activities in American houses, where objects move with purpose, voices echo through empty halls, and the ordinary becomes horrifyingly unexplainable. Prepare yourself for the spirits that dwell behind closed doors may not like visitors. The Bell Street house in New Orleans, Louisiana, has long blended into the quiet charm of its neighborhood. A 2-story Creole cottage with peeling pastel paint and iron-lace balconies. To most passers-by, it looked like just another aging home holding layers of history. But to the family who moved in during the humid summer of 2019, the house quickly revealed that its history was far from silent. It began with small disturbances that were easy to brush off as accidents. A ceramic mug tumbling from the kitchen counter. A picture frame turning slightly askew. The family blamed uneven flooring or vibrations from the streetcars a few blocks away. But the incidents grew bolder and excuses ran thin. The sound was so sharp it echoed through the house like shattered glass, yet not a single jar had broken. The moment she bent to pick them up, the overhead lights flickered violently, humming with a low tremor. The next morning brought a new level of unease. As the father entered the dining room, he found the heavy oak table shifted several feet from its usual place. The chairs were scattered around it, pushed back as if an invisible crowd had abruptly stood up from a meal. No one in the family had touched the furniture, and no one could explain how something so solid had moved without any noise or effort. The oldest daughter whispered that she had heard footsteps roaming the halls night after night. But the parents dismissed her fiercer, at least until they heard them too. Over the following weeks, the activity escalated beyond the family's ability to rationalize. Dishes snapped in half while resting untouched on the dish rack. Doors slammed with such force that the wooden frames rattled. Objects seemed to leap from shelves in full arcs, as if intentionally thrown. At times, a family would walk into a room and find the air icy cold, the type of chill that raised goosebumps and made breath turn visible. The worst moments unfolded in the middle of the night. Knocking echoed through the walls slow, deliberate, and never coming from the same place twice. Sometimes the knocks were soft, like fingertips tapping. Other times they were so loud that the family would jolt awake in terror, convinced someone was breaking in. Yet every time they checked, the house stood empty, and the locks were still secure. Whispers haunted them too, faint, breathy, and impossible to understand, except for the Tonia sometimes pleading, sometimes angry. The youngest child described it as someone talking inside the walls, more than once. The parents heard their names called from empty rooms. The voices sounded close enough to touch, yet no one was there. Desperation pushed the family to seek help. After endless research, they invited a team of paranormal investigators from Baton Rouge who had experience with historic Southern homes. The investigators arrived with cameras, audio recorders, and an air of curiosity, eager to uncover the source of the unrest. From the moment they stepped inside, the equipment reacted. Digital thermometers dipped drastically in certain corners, sometimes registering temperatures 20 degrees lower than the rest of the room. EMF detectors pulse erratically. The team set up stationary cameras throughout the home, focusing on the hallway where most of the knocking had been heard. Within hours, the footage began capturing unusual phenomena. Small orbs of light drifted through rooms like floating embers, disappearing the moment they reached a wall. Shadows moved independently of any living person, crossing the hallway in long, smooth strides. One silhouette lingered near the staircase for several seconds before fading into the dimness like smoke dissolving in the wind. During a late-night investigation session, 2 team members heard whispers behind them, so close the breath seemed to touch their skin. When they spun around, the room was empty. On the audio recording, the whisper came through clearly as soft, strained, and layered, as if more than one voice spoke at once. The investigators exchanged a glance heavy with alarm. The house also responded physically. A stack of books slid off a table, right in front of the cameras, and a wooden chair rocked violently back and forth without anyone touching it. At one point, a door upstairs creaked open by itself slowly, as though nudged by an unseen hand. After reviewing the evidence, the investigators explained to the family that the Bell Street house likely held multiple energies, not just one. The structure dated back to the early 1800s and had survived hurricanes, fires, and countless changes in owners. Whatever lingered there seemed emotionally charged, jaded, or restless, protective, and perhaps clinging to memories long forgotten. The activity wasn't a team malicious, they said, but it was undeniably powerful. Even with this explanation, the house remained unpredictable. The family tried cleansing rituals, prayers, and even rearranging furniture. Some nights were peaceful, while others brought fresh waves of activity of crashing sounds, rushing cold wind, and flashes of movement in the corners of their eyes. They realized the Bell Street house was never going to return to normal, at least not in the way they hoped. Eventually, the family chose to move out. The new owners claim the house is charming and peaceful, though neighbors still speak of strange lights glowing through the windows at night, and shadows that cross the upstairs rooms when no one is home. The Elmwood Drive residence in Chicago, Illinois, appears like any other quiet suburban homeo white siding. Trim bushes, and a modest porch light that glows softly at dusk. But for the families who lived there, the house gradually revealed a presence that refused to stay silent, a presence that made ordinary life feel like walking through a shifting shadow. The disturbances began subtly, so subtle that the residents blamed faulty wiring or drafts sneaking through old window frames. A door swinging open on its own, lights flickering in the hallway, the thermostat dropping even though the heat was running full blast. Chicago winters were harsh, so cold pockets were into tea unusual, but these were different. These icy drafts appeared in rooms with shut windows and sealed vents, spraying across the air like invisible footsteps. At first, the family chalked it up to aging infrastructure. The house had been built in the mid-1900s, after all, but soon the activity became impossible to dismiss. It wasn't just one door swinging opina, it was every door in the hallway slamming shut at the same time, the sound echoing through the home with a force that made the walls tremble. It wasn't just a light flickering there, it was the entire upstairs floor going dark for a full minute, before blinking back on, accompanied by the faint scent of something metallic. The most unnerving disturbances involved objects vanishing. Wallets disappeared from bedroom dressers, only to be found tucked inside kitchen cupboards. Keys went missing, turning up in the bathtub. A TV remote reappeared wedged behind a bookshelf no one had touched. These wearing at tea accidental misplacements. The items turned up in places no one would logically place them, almost as if somebody or something was deliberately moving them. One afternoon, the mother in the household entered the kitchen and found every cabinet door wide open. Moments earlier, she had been in the room with everything perfectly in place. Now, the kitchen looked like someone had gone through it in a frenzy. The air was cold enough to sting her cheeks, and as she reached to close the nearest cabinet, the door slammed shut before her hand touched it. She stood frozen, her pulse pounding her ears, as a feeling of being watched settled over her like a heavy blanket. Each family member had their own experiences, but the most disturbing moment came one evening when the eldest daughter was home alone. She had been studying in her room when she felt something brush against her back, a gentle nudge at first, like someone trying to get her attention. She turned around, expecting to see a sibling, but the room was empty. She tried to reason with herself, thinking it might have been her jacket slipping off her chair or a loose curtain catching the draft. But then it happened again, harder this time. She felt two undeniable hands press against both of her shoulders, shoving her forward. The chill in the room deepened, swallowing the heat from her breath. Terrified, she fled the house and waited outside in the cold until her parents came home. After she explained what happened, her parents exchanged a look they didn't want to admit. They should read a fear mixed with a realization that they were in over their heads. Night after night, the activity intensified. The slamming doors became louder, sometimes occurring in rapid succession like someone running through the hallway. The cold draft settled into specific corners of the home, lingering in places where the family avoided standing. The lights flickered so often that the family stopped replacing bulbs, knowing full well it wasn't an electrical issue. They brought in an electrician, a contractor, and even the previous homeowner, but no one could find a rational explanation. Everything in the house was structurally sound. The wiring was fine. The vents were sealed. Nothing suggested that the house should behave the way it did. As the family grew more desperate, they installed cameras in the hallway and living room. The footage captured nothing definitive. No figures, no sudden movements, but it did catch something odd. The lights flickering off and then on while the light switches never moved. A door slammed shut, though no airflow was visible. A pile of books toppled over even though no one had walked past them. The events were subtle on camera, but impossible to explain. What the cameras couldn't capture were the feelings, the prickling sensation on the back of the neck, the subtle pressure on the chest when walking into certain rooms, the sense that something stood just behind them, close enough to breathe on their skin. On the final night, before the family decided to leave the Elmwood Drive residence for good, the temperature dropped sharply. The ceiling light flickered, then glowed brighter than ever before. A loud bang echoed from upstairs, followed by another, then another. Then the footsteps began a heavy, slow, deliberatia coming down the hallway, pausing just outside the living room door. No one dared move. No one dared speak. The doorknob rattled twice. Then the house fell silent. That was enough. By morning, the family packed everything they could and left without looking back. The house was later rented out, but each new resident reported similar disturbances. Some lasted weeks, others only a few days before breaking their lease. Some say the house is simply old. The Crescent Avenue house in New York City sat wedged between two tall brick buildings, its narrow frame an old stone FAA section Ade, giving a worn, almost forgotten charm. But for the couple who moved in during early spring, the house held a far deeper historia, one that seemed eager to make itself known the moment they unpacked their boxes. On their first night, the house felt unusually heavy, as though the walls carried a weight that pressed inward. The couple tried to shake off the feeling, assuming it came from exhaustion. But as they lay in bed, a soft, deliberate sound echoed down the hallway of footsteps, slow and measured, moving across the creaking floorboards. The footsteps paused outside their bedroom door, then continued back down the hall. He checked every corner of the house. No windows were open, no pets scurried across the floor, and the front door remained locked. Over the following days, the footsteps became a nightly routine. Sometimes they circled the living room. Sometimes they paced the staircase. The couple began to sleep with the lights on, hoping the glow would bring some comfort. But the lights only revealed more unsettling experiences. Small objects of pens, coasters, Lisa would suddenly launch off tables, as though swatted by an unseen hand. A glass tumbler once flew across the kitchen, shattering against the far wall. The sound echoed through the house like a warning. The wife told herself she must have imagined it. But the next day, the husband heard a voice calling him from the basement. It was faint, drawn out, and unmistakably human. He followed the sound down the stairs, but the basement was silent, cold, and shadowed. Dust drifted in the air, settling again on old wooden beams. At night, the whispers grew bolder. They traveled through the vents, rolled down the hallways, and sometimes formed full sentences too soft to understand. When one whisper came from directly beside the wifey's pillow, close enough to stir her hair, she finally admitted she was terrified. Desperate for answers, the couple contacted a team of paranormal investigators known for handling old New York homes with unexplained activity. The team arrived with equipment cases, sensors, cameras, and a sense of practice calm. The moment they stepped inside, several devices spiked with abnormal electromagnetic readings. According to the investigators, the electromagnetic field in the Crescent Avenue house behaved unlike anything they typically encountered. Certain rooms pulsed with bursts of inexplicable energy. The investigators placed cameras throughout the home and set up audio recorders in the hallway, where footsteps were most common. They invited the couple to stay in the living room while the team conducted their investigation. Within the first hour, the upstairs hallway camera captured something unusual. A dark shape, almost like a condensed shadow, passed quickly from one doorway to another. It lasted only a fraction of a second, but the shape had distinct movementa, purposeful and controlled, not a trick of light. In the basement, another investigator experienced a sudden drop in temperature so extreme that his breath became visible, despite the warm spring weather outside. He reported hearing faint footsteps moving above him, but everyone else was on the main floor. Later that evening, while the team reviewed live audio feeds, one recorder captured a whisper calling the wifey, "Es ne Magina," this time clearer, more intentional. The voice did not match anyone in the house. Moments after the whisper, the camera in the living room flickered, then went dark. When the feed returned, a pale figure stood momentarily in the doorway, before dissolving into the shadows. Two investigators saw in real time, both confirming what they witnessed. Another apparition appeared briefly on footage from a kitchen, a translucent figure standing near the counter, its form wavering like heat on asphalt. They concluded it was not a camera glitch. The image had mass movement and shape. As the night wore on, the activity intensified. One investigator felt a tug on his coat sleeve. Another reported a heavy pressure on his chest while walking up the stairs, as though someone had pressed both hands against him. Several devices malfunctioned simultaneously, either shutting down or displaying unreadable data. By dawn, the investigators had gathered more evidence than they expected in a single night. They described the house as highly active, possibly home to multiple presences that interacted directly with the living. They told the couple that whatever resided there seemed intelligent, aware of their presence, aware of their emotions, and capable of responding. The couple listened quietly, exchanging a look that said everything: fear, understanding, and a reluctant acceptance that this was not a temporary disturbance. They had loved the house at first sight, but some places held histories that refused to rest. Within weeks, they moved out. Today, the Crescent Avenue house still stands on its narrow street in New York City, a place where neighbors occasionally glance upward at darkened windows and wonder why lights flicker inside when no one lives there anymore. Some say the footsteps still echo through the halls long after nightfall. Others claim the house simply waits, listening, whispering, and watching for whoever dares to enter next. The Pine Street home in Seattle, Washington, stood among tall evergreens and misty morning fog, a quiet two-story structure with cedar shingles and wide windows that gazed out over the neighborhood. It was the kind of house that seemed peaceful at first glance, almost serene, as if tucked gently into the natural hush of the Pacific Northwest. But for the homeowners who moved in during an especially rainy autumn, the calm exterior hid something far more restless inside. Their first few weeks were filled with the typical sounds of settling into a new home, unpacking boxes, learning the creaks of the floors, adjusting to the rhythm of dripping rain against the glass. Yet even early on, they sensed something was off. The house seemed too reactive, too aware. At times, they felt watched, as though someone stood behind them just out of sight. The feeling came and went, like a cold breeze gliding across the back of the neck. One evening, as the couple sat in the living room reading, the coffee table began to rattle softly. They both noticed it, but said nothing, hoping it was just an effect of an uneven floor or the distant rumble of passing traffic. But then the table lifted slowly, impossibly hovering an inch above the rug before settling back down with a quiet thump. The couple stared at each other in stunned silence, both realizing they had seen the exact same thing. Over the next several days, the activity increased. Bookshelves trembled violently, without any sign of vibration in the house. Hardbound novels slid out one by one, falling to the floor as though pushed by invisible hands. Drawers in the kitchen opened and slammed shut repeatedly, as if someone were searching for something with growing frustration. The homeowners tried to document the occurrences on their phones, but each time they pressed record, the activity stopped instantly, leaving behind only a heavy stillness. When they lowered their phones, the shaking or slamming would resume again. One night, the husband stepped into the hallway after hearing a loud thud. What he saw rooted him in place. A tall, shadowy figure stood in the doorway of the guest bedroom, motionless, its form darker than the surrounding darkness. It wasn't a T-shape like a trick of light or an illusion cast by furniture. It had height, mass presence. For a split second, he thought someone had broken in. But when he took a cautious step forward, the figure dissolved into thin air, disappearing so quickly it left nothing behind but the faint smell of damp earth. The wife encountered the figure a week later. She was carrying a load of laundry toward the stairs when she felt a sudden chill pass through the hallway. As she turned toward the bedroom doors, there was a guy in a tall, shadowed silhouette standing perfectly still. This time, it appeared closer, positioned directly in front of her path. Her breath caught in her throat as she whispered a trembling greeting, unsure what else to do. But the figure didn't move. It didn't tilt its head or shift its weight. It simply vanished the moment she blinked. After these encounters, the couple grew increasingly uneasy. They slept with lights on. They kept the television running as background noise. They avoided being alone in separate rooms. Yet the activity only intensified, as though feeding off their anxiety. One stormy evening, as the wind howled to the pines outside, the home erupted with energy unlike anything they had yet experienced. The dining room chairs lifted several inches off the floor, hovering in midair like marionettes pulled by invisible strings. A bookshelf rattled so hard that every book spilled onto the carpet in a cascading crash. The drawers in the hallway dresser shot open, one after another, slamming with such force they echoed throughout the house. In the chaos, the shadowy figure appeared again, this time at the foot of the staircase. The homeowners both saw it simultaneously, their eyes meeting briefly in terrified acknowledgement. The figure stood there, still and tall, as if observing the chaos it had orchestrated. When the husband took a step toward it, the figure dissolved once more, melting away like smoke swallowed by darkness. That night, shaken beyond words, the couple reached out to a local paranormal team with decades of experience investigating unusual activity in the Pacific Northwest. The investigators arrived equipped with EMF meters, infrared cameras, and motion detectors. They immediately sensed the charged atmosphere in the home, describing it as a activia and a intelligent A. The equipment picked up strong electromagnetic fluctuations throughout the house, especially in the hallway where the shadow figure had been seen. Cameras captured drawers sliding open on their own and chairs shifting slightly when no one was near them. A motion detector in the living room activated repeatedly despite the room being empty. Even more unsettling, one camera recorded a dark, tall blur near the staircase, matching the couple's descriptions. The investigators concluded that the Pine Street home was host to a powerful entity not necessarily harmful, but deeply rooted to the house, aware of its surroundings, and capable of manipulating physical objects with ease. They suggested various cleansing rituals and energy balancing techniques, though they emphasized that such a presence might never fully disappear. Reluctantly, the homeowners decided to leave. The memories of levitating furniture and standing shadow figures were too much to ignore. They moved out in the spring, leaving behind a home that had once promised tranquility. Today, the Pine Street home remains a quiet part of the Seattle neighborhood, its windows reflecting the passing rain. But neighbors sometimes report strange sights at dusk of lights flickering in empty rooms, shadows shifting behind curtains, and the faint sound of drawers opening when no one is inside. The house, it seems, still holds its mysterious guest, waiting silently between the pines. The Maple Lane residence in Boston, Massachusetts, looked like the kind of home where generations of families might gather around holiday dinners. its red brick exterior warmed by soft porch lights and a well-kept garden lining the walkway. But for the residents who moved in just before winter, the house carried a tension beneath its charm, an uneasy feeling that something unseen lingered in every room, waiting, watching, listening. The disturbances began quietly, a soft murmur drifting through the hall, a faint clicking sound in the kitchen. The family assumed it was the old heating system or the house settling against the cold New England air. But the sound soon grew louder, sharper, impossible to ignore. One night, as the couple prepared for bed, they heard voices rising from the downstairs living room, two distinct voices engaged in a heated argument. The tones were muffled, but the cadence was unmistakable. Frustration, anger, back-and-forth dialogue. The husband rushed down the stairs, expecting to find an intruder, but the room lay in complete silence. The lights were off. The air felt strangely heavy, like a storm had just passed through. The voices continued over the next several nights. Sometimes the argument was so loud it echoed through the vents, making it impossible to sleep. Other times, the house felt eerily quiet until one voice whispered sharply from behind a closed door, snapping the residents to full attention. Each time they investigated, they found no thing and no people, no running electronics, and no source for sound. Then came the dishes. One afternoon, the wife stepped into the kitchen to find a plate lying shattered across the floor. She had heard no crash, no falling object. The plate had simply appeared broken, scattered in perfect fragments. The next morning, 2 wine glasses exploded inside the cabinet, the sound so violent it made her drop the mug in her hand. Within the week, porcelain bowls cracked down the middle without being touched. The lights began turning on and off at unpredictable times. Sometimes they would flicker rapidly, buzzing with an electrical hum despite a clean bill of health from an electrician. Other times they would extinguish entire rooms in darkness, only to blaze back to life minutes later. The hallway light, in particular, behaved as if controlled by an unseen hand just switching itself on at exactly 3:14 a.m. 3 nights in a row. By the time spring arrived, the residents were exhausted from sleepless nights and relentless anxiety. They began to avoid certain rooms, especially the dining room where the voices were loudest. The air in that space felt consistently cold, cold enough that you could see your breath in the morning hours. The couple finally reached out to a team of local paranormal investigators known for their work in New England's oldest neighborhoods. The team arrived equipped with infrared devices, cameras, EMF meters, and thermal sensors. The moment they stepped inside, the investigators exchanged uneasy looks. The temperature near the front entryway dropped sharply, enough for one investigator to comment on the sudden chill. Another's EMF meter spiked the second they crossed into the dining room. They began their sweep of the house, taking careful notes. In the kitchen, the temperature fluctuated so quickly that the thermometer readings jumped in real time. One corner dipped to icy levels while the rest of the room stayed warm. In the hallway, the devices captured several orbs of light drifting along the walls, moving with smooth, deliberate patterns. The orbs appeared bright on camera, almost glowing, leaving faint trails of motion as they traveled from floor to ceiling. One investigator felt a draft pass directly through him near the staircase, an unnatural cold that made his skin prickle. Another stood in the dining room and heard the faint sound of 2 people arguing. The voices were distant yet unmistakable. When she stepped toward the sound, the room fell silent, as though the house realized it was being watched. The team set up stationary cameras and audio recorders overnight to capture any unfiltered activity. What they documented was startling. On the footage, orbs moved across the dining room in slow, curving lines, reacting almost as if aware of one another. A chair shifted slightly, scraping across the hardwood floor, though no one was near it. The lights flickered consistently at the same time every night. In one recording, the audio picked up a burst of angry whispering followed by a loud crack, though the kitchen remained untouched. One clip captured something more chilling. As an investigator walked past the living room doorway, a faint shadow crossed behind him, shaped like a person moving quickly out of frame. When they replayed the footage, they noticed the shadow had no defined featuresa, just a tall, solid outline that vanished as soon as it appeared. By morning, the investigators concluded that the Maple Lane residence had significant paranormal activity centered in the dining room and hallway. They described the presence as interactive, intelligent enough to mimic arguments, manipulate objects, and respond to movement. They recommended a cleansing or historical investigation to uncover the house's past, though they warned that some homes simply hold on to what came before. The residents tried to live with the disturbances a little longer, hoping the activity would fade, but the voices grew louder, the cold spots deeper, and the fear more consuming. Eventually, they made the difficult decision to leave. Today, the Maple Lane residence sits quietly on its Boston Street, sunlight glinting off its brick walls. But neighbors still talk about lights flickering at odd hours, and strange sounds drifting from empty rooms, and orbs dancing across darkened windowsa. Signs that whatever once argued within its walls has never truly stopped. The Franklin Avenue house in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, was a stately old structure built in the early 1900s, with tall windows, polished floors, and a wraparound porch that creaked softly under shifting seasons. To anyone passing by, it looked like a timeless piece of neighborhood historia calm, elegant, settled. But for the family who moved in during a crisp autumn, the house soon revealed that its history was anything but quiet. The first strange occurrence happened just a week after they unpacked. The family blamed an unsteady nail. But then another picture fell the next day, and then another. Always with force, always without anyone nearby to knock it loose. Soon, several decorations and shelves toppled in the middle of the night, the crashes echoing so loudly they woke the entire household. Furniture began to shift as well. Chairs were dragged several feet from their original positions. The living room coffee table rotated completely around by morning. Even the heavy oak dresser upstairs slid 6 inches away from the wall without leaving a scratch on the floor. These movements weren't at tea accidental. They were purposeful, almost as if the house were rearranging itself based on its own mysterious logic. But it wasn't the tea just objects that disturbed the familiar. It was the constant noise. At all hours, strange sounds echoed to the halls. Rhythmic tapping, muffled thuds, and long, drawn-out creaking that didn't at all match the normal settling of an old home. Sometimes it sounded like someone walking across the attic, even though the attic was empty and locked. Other times, footsteps rushed down the stairs, growing louder until they abruptly stopped in the foyer. The family would rush to check, but the space always remained still and undisturbed. As unsettling as the noises were, the voices were far worse. It started with the youngest family member hearing someone whisper her name late at night. She swore she heard it clearly, a voice close enough to feel warm breath on her ear. When she turned on the lamp, the room was empty. The parents tried to comfort her, insisting it was a dream or the wind brushing against the windows. But days later, the father heard someone calling from the basement with a low, insistent tone. Believing a family member needed help, he hurried down the stairs, only to find the basement completely silent. The mother experienced it next. While cooking dinner alone, she heard someone softly say her name from behind. She turned, expecting to see her husband, but the kitchen doorway was empty. The voice was unmistakably humana familiar, almosta, but it held a strange echo, as though carried from a long distance. By now, fear became a constant companion in the Franklin Avenue house. The family no longer walked from room to room, without turning on every light along the way. They avoided the creaking hallway at night and slept with their doors locked, even though locks did little against whatever lingered within the walls. Desperate for clarity, the family contacted a team of paranormal investigators known for documenting unexplained activity in older East Coast homes. When the team arrived, they immediately sensed an odd energy in the air, dense, electric, and unsettling. One investigator remarked that the house felt awake, as though it were listening. They set up cameras, motion sensors, and light meters throughout the house. In the upstairs hallway, a sensor flickered erratically, responding to something unseen. The living room camera captured intermittent shadow patterns on the wall shadows that didn't a T match the furniture, didn't a T align with any window, and shifted as though walking past a lens. During a controlled session in the dining room, one investigator asked simple questions aloud, hoping to provoke a response. At first, nothing happened. Then a soft tapping began in the far corner. 3 taps. A pause. 2 taps. Another pause. The team exchanged glances. The pattern was deliberate, not random noise. That same night, one of the cameras caught an even more disturbing image. A dark, flickering shadow crossing the kitchen doorway into the hall, moving with a fast, jerking motion. The figure had no shape, no clear gesso, only an elongated blur that seemed to pulse in and out of visibility. It vanished before reaching the end of the hallway, dissolving into thin air. The investigators also recorded dramatic temperature drops in certain rooms, especially near the staircase, where the air would shift from warm to freezing in seconds. One investigator described feeling a cold spot pass directly through him, like stepping into a wall of ice. Another reported hearing a whisper near his ear during the session, though none of the team members had spoken. When the investigators reviewed the footage and audio recordings with the family, the evidence confirmed what they already feared. Something in the Franklin Avenue house was active, responsive, and deeply rooted. The shadows, the voices, the movement, none of it was random. Whatever was inside the home seemed intent on making its presence known. The family struggled to stay after that, but the activity grew stronger. More objects fell from walls. More furniture moved. The voices grew louder, sometimes calling from multiple rooms at once. The sense of being watched became overwhelming. Eventually, they made the difficult decision to move out, leaving behind the home they had once hoped would be their haven. Today, the Franklin Avenue house stands quietly among Philadelphia's historic streets. But locals still claim to see flickering shadows through the windows at night, and hear faint voices drifting from the porch when the world is otherwise silent. The house remains, waiting to lie with memories that refuse to fade. The Hawthorne Street residence in Los Angeles, California, was never meant to be anything more than a quiet suburban home. Nestled beneath swaying palm trees and bathed in warm coastal light, it looked like the kind of place where families settled, where memories were made, and where evenings ended peacefully. But for the Ramirez family, who moved in during the late summer, the house quickly revealed a presence that made peace impossible. What they first believed were quirks of an aging structure soon spiraled into a series of events that defied logic and rattled their sense of safety. The disturbances began on a warm Tuesday evening when the family returned from dinner. As they stepped inside, a loud slam echoed through the hallway. They rushed to check the source, only to find the bathroom door violently shut, though no one had been inside. A draft might have explained it, but the air in the hallway was still and heavy. Shrugging it off, they continued with their night, unaware that this was only the beginning of the house's attempts to make its presence known. 2 nights later, while the family sat together watching television, the living room TV suddenly shut off. Seconds later, it turned back on at full volume, blaring static that filled the room with a piercing hiss. They scrambled to turn it off again, only for the screen to flicker and power itself back on repeatedly. When the remote was removed from the room entirely, the television continued its frantic behavior, until finally going black, as if whatever force was manipulating it had grown tired. Objects began flying across rooms with no warning. A ceramic bowl lifted from the kitchen counter one morning and launched itself toward the opposite wall, shattering into pieces at the feet of Mrs. Ramirez. Books toppled from shelves in the den and slid across the hardwood floor. A set of house keys that had been placed on the entryway table was thrown several feet into the living room, landing near the couch where Mr. Ramirez had been sitting. Each incident left the family shaken. The atmosphere inside the house thickened with a tension that felt nearly alive. The family often felt watched, Shadows fluttered in their peripheral vision, disappearing the moment they turned to look. One night, their teenage son awoke to the sense of someone standing at his bedroom door. When he opened his eyes, he saw a tall, dark silhouette lingering in the doorway, motionless and silent. Before he could scream, the figure faded backward into the hallway and vanished as though melting into the air. Unable to ignore the escalating activity, the family called a team of paranormal investigators. The team arrived with equipment designed to measure environmental changes, electromagnetic fields, and audio disturbances. Within minutes of stepping inside, their devices registered abnormal spikes. The kitchen, in particular, seemed to pulse with bursts of energy that rose and fell like invisible waves. The investigators noted that the readings were strongest near the refrigerator and along the far wall, where the family had experienced the most object movement. In the living room, one of the investigators reported feeling an intense cold rush past him, though the air temperature in the room remained unchanged. Another team member set a motion-sensitive camera on the coffee table. Moments later, it recorded a shadow stretching across the room, elongated, unnatural, and shifting in a way no human figure could. The silhouette hovered near the entryway, as though observing the group before slipping out of frame. Throughout the night, the family and investigators heard faint murmurs drifting through the house. Though the words were indistinct, the tone carried a sense of warning, as if spoken by someone unseen and impatient. The sound seemed to move from room to room, circling the house like a restless entity unable to settle. Even more disturbing were the whispers that came from behind closed doors of soft voices that mimicked the family members, calling their names in tones eerily similar to their own. In the early hours of the morning, the loudest incident occurred. A deafening slam shook the entire house, as all the doors on the first floor forcefully shut at once. The sudden blast of sound startled everyone, and as they rushed to open the doors, they found each one stuck as though held shut by an unseen hand. When they finally budged open, the house fell silent, still, and eerily calm. Following the investigation, the family decided they could no longer stay. Within a week, they packed their belongings and left the Hawthorne Street residence behind. The house now sits quietly on its suburban street, its windows reflecting sunlight like any other home. But those who have entered since tell similar stories of shadows at the edges of their vision, televisions flickering to life in empty rooms, and doors slamming with no one near them. Whatever lingers within the walls of the Hawthorne Street residence has made it clear it is not a passive presence. Instead, it is something aware, something watchful, and something that chooses when and how it wants to be known. The Oakwood Drive home in Houston, Texas, looked like any other comfortable neighborhood house from the out-city light brick walls, a well-kept yard, and a quiet street lined with mature oak trees swaying gently in the warm southern breeze. But for the Morales family, who moved into the home during a bright spring afternoon, the charm of the place quickly unraveled. What began as faint noises soon grew into a series of disturbing events that left the family questioning what truly lived within their walls. The first sign that something was wrong came late one evening when the family was settling into bed. Mrs. Morales, half asleep, heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps walking slowly across the upstairs hallway. At first, she believed it was her teenage son returning from the kitchen, but when she went to check, the hallway was empty and her son was fast asleep. The air felt strangely thick, as if someone had just rushed past her, but nothing moved. She returned to bed unsettled, unsure how to explain what she had heard. Over the next week, the footsteps became a regular occurrence. Sometimes they were soft and slow, as though someone were pacing. Other nights they were fast and heavy, like a person running frantically through the corridor. Each time, the family searched the hallways and checked the doors and windows, but they remained securely locked. The disturbances escalated one afternoon while Mr. Morales worked from home. From the corner of his eye, he saw a small decorative planter lift off the end table beside him and fly across the living room, crashing against the wall. Startled, he searched the room for any explanation, a draft, a shifting floorboard, anything. but there was no logical cause. The house grew quiet again, leaving him with the uneasy feeling that he was no longer alone. Objects began moving on their own regularly. A set of pens lifted off a desk and dropped onto the floor as if batted by an invisible hand. A framed family photo toppled over without anyone near it. A glass on the kitchen counter slid several inches as though pushed intentionally. What began with small items soon expanded to larger disturbances. One morning, the living room coffee table had shifted several feet from its usual position. The most frightening event involving the furniture occurred when the family was preparing for dinner. As they stood in the kitchen, the refrigerator door slowly creaked open on its own. Mrs. Morales reached out to close it, only for it to slam shut with such force that the dishes inside rattled loudly. Even the family dog refused to go near the kitchen afterward, growling at empty corners as though sensing a presence the humans could not see. But it wasn't the footsteps or the moving objects that disturbed the family. It was the voices. Late at night, when the house was quiet, whispers drifted through the rooms. These were not the typical creaks or settling noises of an older home. These were distinct voices, layered and overlapping, as if multiple people were speaking at once. Some sounded panicked. Others sounded mournful. The voices seemed to come from the walls themselves, echoing softly and urgently. One evening, while the family watched television, a sudden whisper rose above the usual background murmurs, clear, sharp, and undeniably human. It sounded like a woman crying out in distress. The room fell silent as everyone stared at one another, each realizing they had heard the same thing. Moments later, another voice followed, this one deeper, strained, as though pleading for help. The voices grew louder, swirling around the room before abruptly fading away, leaving behind a cold, electric stillness. Determined to understand what was happening, the family contacted a team of paranormal investigators. When the investigators arrived, they immediately noted temperature irregularities throughout the home. Cold spots formed in the middle of heated rooms. Energy meters spiked violently near the staircase, which the family believed was the source of footsteps. Audio devices picked up faint cries and hushed conversations, even when the house was completely silent. During the investigation, one team member sat alone in the living room with a voice recorder. As she asked questions into the empty air, her teammates watched from the hallway. Without warning, the armchair beside her shifted an inch, scraping loudly against the floor. She froze, the air around her suddenly icy. Moments later, a whisper filled the room, so clear the entire team heard it. It sounded like a man urging someone to get out. When they reviewed their equipment later, the recorder captured not just a man's whisper, but several other voices overlapping behind it, as though a crowd of unseen people were trying to speak at once. By the end of the investigation, the consensus was unmistakable. The Oakwood Drive home was active with presence, or perhaps several presences, none of which seemed at peace. Though no definitive history explained the source of the unrest, the investigators advised the family to consider relocating. Within weeks, the Morales family packed their belongings and left the house. They never returned. Today, the Oakwood Drive home stands quietly beneath the shade of its towering oak trees. But neighbors still report strange noises drifting through the night. Those who pass by often describe the eerie feeling of being watched, as if the spirits inside the home linger, waiting, still whispering their stories of distress to anyone willing to listen. The Willow Street house in Denver, Colorado, was meant to be a fresh start for the Benefamilia, a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood, a spacious backyard for their children, and a home that felt warm and welcoming on the day they moved in. The house itself was unassuming, painted a soft cream with blue shutters and tall windows that let in plenty of morning light. But beneath its charming appearance, something else waited. And it didn't take long for the Bennetts to realize that they weren't living alone. The first strange occurrence happened on a chilly autumn evening, about 1 week after they settled in. Mrs. Bennett was unpacking dishes while her husband set up the living room. Without warning, a loud crack burst through the kitchen. When she turned toward the sound, she saw a glass cup split neatly in half on the counter. No one had touched it. It hadn't a tea fallen. It hadn't a tea even been warm. The break was impossibly clean, as if some unseen force had snapped it deliberately. Confused, she brushed it off as a manufacturing flaw and explanation that would soon collapse under the weight of what came next. Over the following days, more cups and plates shattered without reason. Sometimes they broke quietly, fracturing on the countertop like brittle shells. Other times they exploded violently, sending shards across the room as though hurled by an invisible hand. The family grew uneasy, especially as a strange activity always seemed to happen when someone was nearby, as if the house was watching their routine and choosing its moments to interrupt. Then the lights began their unpredictable dance. At first, it was nothing more than a flicker here, and thereat easily blamed on wiring or old bulbs. But the flickering grew more intense each night. Lights dimmed slowly, pulsing like a heartbeat. Ceiling lamps strobed uncontrollably during dinner. Lamps switched on by themselves at 3 a.m., filling rooms with harsh, sudden brightness. The family electrician inspected the house twice and found everything in perfect working order. But the lights continued their strained behavior, as if responding to emotions within the home. Doors joined the chorus next. Even on windless days, they slammed with enough force to rattle the entire frame. Bedroom doors shut while someone was walking through them, forcing the person to stumble back. Cabinet doors swung open and closed repeatedly, creating a rhythmic thudding that echoed through the house. The front door once slammed with such intensity that the windows trembled. Neighbors later said no wind had passed through the street that night. By this point, the Bennetts were no longer dismissing the incidents. A heaviness had settled into the atmosphere of the homia pressure that made the air feel dense, almost charged. The family often felt as though they were being watched. At times, they sensed someone standing behind them, only to turn around and find empty space. Their son, who slept in the upstairs bedroom, said he heard footsteps in the hallway every night that stopped right outside his door. Desperate for answers, the family contacted a paranormal investigation group known for handling active and aggressive hauntings. The team arrived with cameras, meters, sensors, and infrared equipment, setting up quietly and methodically in the living room. Almost immediately, they reported unusual readings. The air in the home was colder than the outdoor temperature, but the drop wasn't a T consistena. It shifted from warm to cold within seconds, as though someone was walking past. As the investigators monitored their equipment, small lights began appearing on their cameras. Orbs drifted across the rooms, some moving slowly, others darting with purpose. One orb hovered near the staircase, flickering and pulsing before shooting upward and vanishing. Another floated behind Mr. Bennett as he spoke to an investigator, almost as if it were listening. The team noted that these were Arena T dust particles or lens reflections. The shapes were too defined and their movement too intentional. Shadows appeared next. While reviewing the camera position in the hallway, an investigator noticed a dark figure move across the frame. It wasn't a TA trick of the lighter. This shadow had shape, depth, and even a slight outline of a head and shoulders. When they replayed the footage, they saw the figure pause at the Childrina's bedroom door before slipping out of view. At the same moment the footage was recorded, the children reported feeling cold and hearing a faint whisper from inside their room. Activity intensified as the night went on. A door slammed upstairs, startling everyone. A cup on the dining table slid several inches on its own before tumbling off the edge. The hallway light flickered rapidly, then shut off entirely. One investigator felt a sudden tug on his shirt, though no one was near him. Another reported hearing a woman's voice whisper directly into his ear, soft yet urgent, though he couldn't make out the words. What disturbed the family most was the clear sense that the presence in the house was not randoma, it was aware. It reacted to their movements, seemed to respond to their emotions, and sometimes appeared to position itself between family members, as if observing the dynamics of their lives. It was a haunting with intent, After reviewing the evidence, the investigators concluded that multiple entities might be active within the house. They advised the family that the haunting showed signs of intelligence and attachment, and that staying in a home could lead to increasing encounters. Within a month, the Bennetts moved out. They left behind furniture, belongings, and countless unanswered questions. The Willow Street house still stands quietly beneath the Denver sky, but neighbors sometimes report lights flashing at odd hours and doors slamming inside the empty home. Whatever resides within its walls remains activity still watching, still responding, and still very much present. The Cherry Hill residence in Atlanta, Georgia, carried a charm that seemed to draw the Mitchell family in from the moment they stepped across its threshold. The house was spacious, with high ceilings, polished floors, and warm sunlight filtering through tall windows that overlooked a quiet suburban street. It felt peaceful, lived in, and filled with a kind of history that made a home feel grounded. But as the family unpacked boxes and settled into their new lives there, the house began to reveal a very different idea, one rooted in disturbance rather than comfort. The first odd occurrence was subtle enough that the family brushed it off without concern. A small decorative candle holder sitting on a living room shelf tumbled off and hit the floor. No one had been near it, and the shelf was perfectly stable. This time it didn't just fall. It launched forward, landing several feet away. The incident left the family exchanging uneasy glances. Over the following days, items continued to drop from shelves, sometimes one at a time, sometimes in clusters. A decorative vase spun before tipping over. These events felt too deliberate to be accidents. There was no shaking, no draft, and no pets or people near enough to cause the disturbances. As the family tried to understand the strange activity, the chairs began to move. It started one afternoon when Mrs. Mitchell entered the dining room and found one of the chairs pulled back on the table, as if someone had been sitting there moments earlier. She pushed it back and continued with her tasks. But when she returned, 2 more chairs were out of place, angled toward the hallway. She asked her children if they had been in the room, but both denied it. The next morning, all 6 dining chairs were pushed away from the table in perfect alignment, as though they had been arranged intentionally. The mirrors in the home soon joined the disturbances. Despite warm temperatures in the bedrooms and hallways, the mirrors began fogging over. The steam didn't behave like natural condensation. It appeared in circular patches or streaks, often forming moments after someone entered a room. One evening, as the family prepared for bed, the bathroom mirror fogged over completely in the span of a few seconds. Mrs. Mitchell wiped the surface, only to see new fog forming instantly. She froze when shapes began to appear through the mist along, thin streaks that looked eerily like fingerprints dragging downward. Footsteps soon became a nightly ritual. The sound started faintly, like soft taps along the upstairs hallway, the kind of gentle rhythm one might make while pacing. But as nights passed, the footsteps grew louder, more determined, and unmistakably human. They often moved back and forth between the bedrooms, pausing outside each door. When someone opened a door to investigate, the hallway fell silent. No one was there, yet the familiar sensation of being watched lingered in the air. Late at night, whispers drifted through the hallways. At first they were too quiet to distinguish, sounding like distant murmurs carried on wind. But the house was still, and the windows were shut. As the whispers grew louder, they became chillingly conversational. They seemed to come from different areas of the house, sometimes behind a wall, sometimes around a corner, sometimes from right behind a persona S shoulder. The words were indistinct, layered, and urgent, creating an impression of multiple voices speaking at once. One night, Mr. Mitchell awoke to what he thought was his wife calling his name. When he answered, there was no response. He wandered into the hallway and froze. At the far end near the staircase, he heard footsteps approaching. Soft, steady, and deliberate. He called out again, but no one answered. The footsteps continued until they were just a few feet away, then abruptly stopped. The hallway fell silent, but a cold wave of air brushed past him, sending shivers across his skin. The family attempted to rationalize the events, but the experiences increased. Fog mirrors would show faint shapes behind the familiar as reflections. Chairs moved while they were still in the room, sliding inches at a time. Objects fell with loud crashes, even when no one was around. And always, the whispers grew louder near midnight, filling the hallways with disembodied voices that felt plaintive and distressed. Unable to cope with the intensity of the activity, the Mitchells reached out to a paranormal research team. When the investigators arrived, their equipment immediately detected changes in temperature and unexplained energy spikes. Cameras captured orbs drifting through rooms, some pausing in midair before darting away. In one hallway, a shadow appeared briefly on a camera feet tall, thin, and distinctly human Chapita, before vanishing completely. Footsteps were recorded on audio devices, even when the entire family stood motionless. One investigator reported feeling a tug on her sleeve as she stood outside the master bedroom. Another captured whispering voices on an EVP recording, the words indecipherable but undeniably spoken by something unseen. The investigators concluded that the house had strong residual and intelligent paranormal activity. Something in the Cherry Hill residence seemed desperate to communicate, though its motives were unclear. They warned the family that the activity might continue indefinitely and possibly grow stronger. Within weeks, the Mitchell family decided to leave the home behind. The Cherry Hill residence still stands in quiet Atlanta, its exterior as peaceful as ever. But passers-by sometimes report faint footsteps echoing from within, or the flicker of movement behind fog windows. Whatever lingers in the house remains presenter restless, watchful, and undeniably alive in the shadows. The Magnolia Drive home in New Orleans, Louisiana, was a picturesque residence nestled among towering live oaks and moss-draped streets. From the outside, it appeared serenia classic brick walls, a wrought iron balcony, and a welcoming porch that invited neighbors to linger. But for the Rivera family, who moved in during late summer, the beauty of the home belied an unsettling presence. What started as minor disturbances soon escalated into experiences that defied logic and left the family in a state of constant unease. The first indication of unusual activity came one evening when Mrs. Rivera entered the dining room. She gasped as one of the wooden chairs slid across the floor, stopping abruptly near the window. At first, she blamed it on the uneven flooring or the slight vibration from a nearby street. Yet over the following nights, the chair continued to move on its own. Sometimes it would tip slightly, other times it would be repositioned entirely. It was never violent, but always purposeful, as if the furniture itself were being guided by an unseen hand. Shortly thereafter, the drawers in the kitchen and bedrooms began to open and close independently. A silverware drawer creaked open while Mr. The famous singer looked on in confusion and fear. Rivera prepared dinner, then slammed shut without warning. The family tried to explain these occurrences as mechanical malfunctions, but each instance grew more frequent and deliberate, leaving little room for logical explanation. Dishes were next. One afternoon, a coffee cup shattered on the tile without falling from a counter. On another occasion, a plate from a stack in the cupboard inexplicably slid out and broke on the floor. These events were accompanied by no drafts, no vibrations, and no one nearby. The kitchen, once a warm center of the home, became a source of tension, where the family approached tasks with nervous glances and hesitant movements. As the disturbances escalated, the family reported feeling observed. Shadows seemed to flicker at the edges of their vision, and sometimes fleeting figures appeared near the windows. Children would claim they saw shapes outside, only for the figure to vanish when approached. Mr. Rivera, coming home late one evening, noticed a pale silhouette in the living room window. When he cautiously moved toward it, it dissolved into darkness as if it had never existed. The sense of being watched left the family perpetually on edge. Unable to cope, the Rivera family called in a team of paranormal investigators. The team arrived with EMF meters, thermal cameras, and digital recorders, prepared to document the unexplained phenomena. From the moment they entered the Magnolia Drive home, the equipment began registering abnormal readings. EMF spikes appeared in the kitchen and living room areas where the most activity had been reported. Cameras captured something equally remarkable. On multiple occasions, apparitions appeared near windows, visible as faint, human-like shapes. They would linger for moments, observing the investigators or the family, before vanishing as soon as anyone attempted to approach. One video recorded a translucent figure standing silently in the living room window while the EMF meter surged. The team described the figure as upright, with an indistinct form that flickered like smoke, yet maintained a presence that felt tangible. Footsteps and faint whispers were detected throughout the house. While no one was inside certain rooms, audio devices recorded the soft sound of pacing and murmured voices. Occasionally, the sounds were rhythmic, almost deliberate, as though the unseen inhabitants were moving about intentionally. One investigator reported the sensation of a presence standing directly behind him, though no one was visible. When he turned, the room was empty, yet the EMF reading spiked sharply in that precise location. The Rivera family experienced these phenomena on a daily basis. Chairs would subtly shift as they walked past. Drawers would open at unpredictable intervals, and dishes would break without contact. Shadows darted at the edges of their vision, sometimes forming shapes that appeared to mimic their movements. The family could no longer leave the lights off at night, and certain rooms became avoided due to the intensity of the activity. The investigators concluded that the Magnolia Drive home was highly active. They described the phenomena as intelligent and interactive, capable of responding to familiar presence and even anticipating their actions. The apparitions, EMF spikes, and auditory occurrences suggested residual and possibly sentient energy attached to the home. While the team could not determine the exact origin of the disturbances, they confirmed that the activity was genuine and ongoing. Eventually, the Rivera family decided to leave. Packing their belongings and saying goodbye to the home they had hoped would be a haven, seeking safety and peace elsewhere. The Magnolia Drive home remains, its windows reflecting the Louisiana sun, and its brick FAA section calm and unassuming. Yet those who walk past often sense an unusual energy, a quiet watchfulness, as if the house remembers and continues to interact with those who enter. Objects still shift, shadows still flicker, and the house waits, patient and persistent, in the heart of New Orleans. The Cedar Street residence in Minneapolis, Minnesota, was a kind of home that seemed inviting at first glance. Nestled on a quiet street lined with mature maple trees, it had a modest brick exterior, wide windows, and a front porch that caught the soft glow of the evening sun. Inside, the house offered spacious rooms, gleaming hardwood floors, and a sense of warmth that drew the Anderson family in immediately. But soon after moving in, they began to sense that the home held secrets far more unsettling than its pleasant appearance suggested. It started subtly. One evening, Mr. Anderson returned home from work to find the living room television on, blaring a static-filled channel, though no one had been in the room for hours. At first, he assumed he had accidentally left it on, but his wife insisted she had turned it off before leaving for an errand. The television flickered and changed channels on its own, as if guided by an invisible hand. The family began to notice the same pattern in other electronics lights, turning off and on without reason, and the faint hum of appliances starting and stopping independently. Shortly thereafter, the objects in the home began to behave unnaturally. A coffee mug lifted off the counter, without explanation, hovering for a few moments before landing with a soft clink on the tile floor. Books on shelves shifted slightly as if nudged, and a decorative vase in the entryway tipped over without falling from anyone's touch. These incidents grew in both frequency and intensity, creating a constant sense of unease for the family. Even walking into a room could trigger movement. A stack of papers would flutter, a chair would slide slightly across the floor, or a lamp would tilt as if acknowledging their presence. The most unsettling phenomena were the whispers. The family began to hear their names called softly, sometimes while they were alone in a room. But soon, the whispers became more distinct, urgent, and persistent. Sometimes they seemed to come from the living room. other times from upstairs, following them as they moved from room to room. Mrs. Anderson recounted a night when she heard her name whispered 3 times in quick succession while she stood in the kitchen, though the hallway beyond was completely empty. The chilling effect of these experiences left the family on edge, hesitant to walk to the house alone, especially at night. Unable to live in a constant state of anxiety, the Andersons contacted a team of paranormal investigators. Equipped with EMF meters, motion sensors, infrared cameras, and audio recorders, the investigators arrived intent on documenting the strange activity. From the moment they stepped inside, the instruments registered abnormal readings. EMF spikes were detected in the living room, the kitchen, and the hallway, often coinciding with objects moving or whispers being reported. The energy reading suggested an invisible presence moving throughout the home with purpose. Cameras captured shadowy forms following the investigator's movements through the rooms. One investigator reported a dark figure slipping along the wall in the living room, its shape indistinct but unmistakably humanoid. When the investigator turned to approach it, the shadow dissipated instantly, leaving behind only a lingering chill in the air. Another camera recorded an elongated silhouette in the hallway, appearing to watch the investigators before vanishing completely. These shadows were not statica. They reacted to movement and seemed aware of those inside the home. The investigators also recorded the levitation of objects. A stack of magazines in the den lifted several inches off the floor and floated silently before dropping back down. A decorative bowl in the kitchen hovered as a cold gust of air swept across the room. In each case, the family and investigators confirmed no drafts or mechanical causes could explain the phenomena. The events appeared deliberate, as if an unseen intelligence were orchestrating the activity. Whispers continued during the investigation, captured on EVP devices. Some were barely audible, almost like echoes, while others were distinct and urgent, calling the names of the family members. One investigator noted that the whispers seemed to react to questions, pausing or repeating words when prompted. The house itself appeared to be communicating, not randomly but with intent. The Andersons described the sensation of being watched constantly. Chairs shifted slightly as they passed by, lamps tilted toward them, and objects moved in ways that seemed designed to capture attention. Lamps tilted toward them, and objects moved in ways that seemed designed to capture attention. Shadowy figures appeared and disappeared in the corners of rooms, often when the family looked directly at them. Even with investigators present, the home maintained a presence that was intelligent, aware, and persistent. The shadow forms, EMF spikes, levitating objects, and whispered voices suggested a conscious entity capable of responding to familiar presence. The investigators concluded that the Cedar Street residence exhibited both residual and interactive paranormal activity. The shadow forms, EMF spikes, levitating objects, and whispered voices suggested a conscious entity capable of responding to familiar presence. While the team could not determine the origin of the phenomena, they affirmed that the activity was genuine and ongoing. The Anderson family, unable to continue living amid such persistent disturbances, eventually made the difficult decision to leave the home. They packed their belongings and departed, seeking peace elsewhere. The Cedar Street residence still stands on its quiet Minneapolis street, its exterior calm and unassuming. Yet those who pass by sometimes notice flickering shadows in windows or sense an energy that feels alive. Inside, objects may still levitate, whispers may still drift through the hallways, and shadowy forms may still follow anyone who dares to move through its rooms. The Birchwood Lane house in Phoenix, Arizona, appeared on the surface to be the perfect family home. Its stucco walls reflected the warm desert sunlight, the yard was shaded by a cluster of saguaros, and a quiet street offered an inviting sense of community. For the Martinez family, who moved in during early spring, it seemed like a place where they could finally settle down and build lasting memories. But it quickly became clear that the home held secrets far more unsettling than they could have imagined. The first strange occurrences were subtle, almost easy to dismiss. Doors began to open and close by themselves. At first, The family attributed it to uneven floors or faulty latches. A bedroom door would swing open late at night, or a closet door would shut without a draft to explain the movement. But as the days passed, the events became more frequent and more forceful. Doors slammed with sharp, unmistakable thuds, startling anyone nearby. Sometimes, a door would open and remain slightly ajar, only to close violently the moment someone approached. Soon after, the lights began to act strangely. Lamps would flicker despite being securely plugged in, and bulbs in perfect working order. Overhead lights would dim and brighten, pulsing in a rhythm that seemed almost intentional. One evening, during dinner, the chandelier above the table stuttered and flickered rapidly, casting erratic shadows across the walls. Even when the family unplugged devices or replaced bulbs, the flickering persisted, leaving them feeling unsettled and unsure whether to trust their own senses. Objects in the house soon began to move on their own. Small items, such as books or decorative figurines, would slide across countertops or tables without anyone touching them. Plates and cups were occasionally thrown, crashing to the floor with alarming force. On more than one occasion, heavy objects like chairs or a small side table were shifted from their original positions. The family tried to rationalize these occurrences, but there were no pets, no intruders, and no logical explanation for the events. Perhaps the most disturbing phenomenon was the footsteps. Family members reported hearing sound behind them, distinct and purposeful, though no one was there. Mrs. Martinez would feel the soft rhythm of steps approaching from a hallway and turn quickly, only to see empty space. Her children described similar experiences of running from room to room with the sense of being followed by an invisible presence. The sound of pacing echoed to floors and walls, growing louder late at night when the house was otherwise silent. The footsteps were never random. They seemed deliberate, almost as if Summonia or something was tracking familiar movements throughout the house. After weeks of escalating activity, the Martinez family reached out to a team of paranormal investigators. The team arrived equipped with EMF meters, motion detectors, thermal cameras, and audio recorders. From the moment they stepped inside, the investigators noticed an oppressive energy in the air, a sense that the house was alive and aware of their presence. EMF readings spiked in multiple rooms, especially near the living room and the staircase, areas where the family had reported the most activity. Cameras captured shadows moving independently of any person in the room. In one clip, a dark, humanoid figure lingered near the hallway wall, before disappearing as the investigator approached. Another camera recorded a chair sliding across the living room floor, seemingly nudged by an unseen force. The investigators noted that objects often moved immediately after someone entered a room, as if the unseen entity were reacting to human presence. Audio equipment recorded faint whispers and murmurs, sometimes overlapping voices, sometimes single, distinct words. The investigators replayed a clip in which the familiar's youngest child called out to her mother, only to hear her own name whispered back almost immediately. As the investigation continued, the family described an intensification of events. Doors slammed with more force, lights flickered in rapid sequences, and objects were thrown with increasing frequency. The sense of being followed by invisible footsteps persisted, accompanied by a heavy, chilling atmosphere that seemed to settle in the rooms. The team concluded that the Birchwood Lane house was a highly active location with both residual and interactive paranormal phenomena. The shadowy forms, EMF spikes, moving objects, and auditory disturbances suggested a presence that was aware of and capable of interacting with the family. The shadowy forms, EMF spikes, moving objects, and auditory disturbances suggested a presence that was aware of and capable of interacting with the family. While the investigators could not determine the exact origin of the disturbances, they confirmed the activity as genuine and ongoing. Ultimately, the Martinez family made the difficult decision to leave. The Birchwood Lane house remains on its quiet Phoenix Street, its exterior calm and unassuming. But those who have entered report doors opening and closing without cause, lights flickering in the absence of electricity, objects moving as if by an invisible hand, and the unmistakable sound of footsteps following them through empty rooms. The house endures, an ever-present witness to a restless and intelligent energy that refuses to be ignored. The Rosewood Drive residence in Miami, Florida, stood as a picture of suburban elegance. Its pastel-colored FAA Section A tropical landscaping and wide windows gave it a welcoming, cheerful appearance. For the Carter family, it seemed like the ideal homia, a fresh start in a sunny neighborhood, with enough space for their children to play and for the family to grow. But soon after moving in, the Carters discovered that the house held a presence far darker than its exterior suggested. The first signs were subtle. Small objects began to move without anyone touching them. A vase on the coffee table shifted slightly when the family entered the living room. A set of keys slid from the kitchen counter onto the floor as though nudged by an invisible hand. At first, the family attempted to explain these events' rationalia drafts, vibrations from passing traffic, or the settling of the Hausea, but the frequency and intensity of the incidents quickly made those explanations impossible. Mirrors soon became a source of terror. One morning, Mrs. Carter entered the hallway and noticed a spiderweb-like crack spreading across the large wall mirror. She had not touched it, and the glass had shown no prior signs of weakness. Later that week, another mirror in the bedroom fractured while the family was out. There were no objects nearby to cause impact, no temperature fluctuations to explain the stress. Each crack seemed deliberate, forming in jagged lines that almost resembled claw marks. The mirrors, once reflective and benign, now felt like portals to something malevolent. Shadows began appearing in the corners of rooms. At first, they were fleeting, barely perceptible at the edge of vision. But over time, they became more distinct. Dark shapes lingered in living rooms, hallways, and bedrooms, retreating when approached but never fully disappearing. The children described seeing figures watching them from corners, their features indistinct but their presence undeniably oppressive. Parents noticed that even when the rooms were empty, the shadows seemed to follow them from room to room, shifting unnaturally and moving with intent. Growls and whispers echoed through the house, often in empty rooms. Sometimes the growls were low, guttural, and threatening, vibrating through the floors and walls. Other times, whispers called a family member bursts of names, soft but insistent, coming from behind closed doors or empty hallways. The sounds were intelligent, almost responsive, as if the unseen presence could sense the familiar-esque movements and emotions. The children began to refuse being alone in certain rooms, and even the adults reported feeling uneasy whenever the house fell silent. Physical sensations soon accompanied the auditory and visual manifestations. Mrs. Carter recounted a night when she felt a cold hand brush her shoulder while she walked down the hallway. She spun around, but the corridor was empty. Mr. Carter described feeling a firm tug at his sleeve in the kitchen, though no one else was present. The children reported similar experiences of gentle touches on their backs, hair being pulled, or cold fingers brushing their arms as they tried to sleep. The family was left in a constant state of anxiety, wary of both shadows and spaces that seemed otherwise ordinary. Desperate for answers, the Carters contacted a team of paranormal investigators. The team arrived with EMF meters, infrared cameras, audio recorders, and motion sensors, preparing to document the disturbances in the Rosewood Drive residence. From the moment they entered, the investigators sensed an oppressive energy. EMF meters registered erratic spikes, especially near mirrors, corners of rooms, and doorways. Motion sensors detected movement in areas that were otherwise empty. Audio devices captured low-frequency growls and whispers that were indistinguishable to the human ear in real time, but were clearly identifiable during playback. Cameras captured shadowy figures shifting along walls and corners, disappearing when approached but returning moments later in a different location. One investigator reported seeing a dark silhouette with vague humanoid features hovering near a mirror before vanishing into thin air. Another recorded an objecta, a small figurinia, lifting several inches above a table before dropping back down with no discernible force applied. The investigators confirmed that these phenomena were neither optical illusions nor mechanical malfunctions. They were deliberate and interactive. The Carters described a heightened sense of awareness and fear in the house. Rooms that should have felt familiar became sources of dread. Even with the investigators present, the mirrors, shadows, and sounds continued to manifest with a frequency and intensity that suggested the house itself was conscious of their presence. The family realized they were dealing with more than residual energy. The activity was intelligent, reactive, and unrelenting. After reviewing the evidence, the investigators concluded that the Rosewood Drive residence exhibited both residual and interactive paranormal phenomena. The combination of moving objects, mirror fractures, shadowy apparitions, audible growls, whispers, and physical touches indicated a highly active presence, possibly multiple entities. The team warned the family that the disturbances were likely to continue and could intensify if the family remained in the home. Eventually, the Carters made the difficult decision to leave the Rosewood Drive residence. They packed their belongings and moved elsewhere, seeking safety and peace. The house remains on its quiet Miami street, its exterior calm and sunlit, betraying nothing of the darkness within. Yet those who pass by occasionally glimpse flickering shadows in the corners, feel a sudden chill, or hear faint whispers when the wind stirs. The Rosewood Drive residence endures, its unseen occupants still watching, still interacting, and still very much present. The Elm Street home in Dallas, Texas, seemed like a dream for the Henderson family. Inside, the house offered spacious rooms, polished hardwood floors, and plenty of natural light. The family had envisioned peaceful evenings, laughter-filled weekends, and quiet nights in their new home. However, soon after moving in, the Hendersons realized that the Elm Street home harbored a presence far from ordinary, a presence that defied logic and threatened the sense of safety they had sought. The first incident occurred just a few days after their arrival. Mrs. Henderson was unpacking the kitchen when a coffee mug suddenly lifted off the counter and crashed onto the floor, shattering into pieces. Startled, she looked around for an explanation, but found nothing. No windows were open, no pets were nearby, and no one had entered the room. At first, the family tried to dismiss it as a fluke, a strange accident in a new house. But the incidents continued and soon escalated beyond small, isolated occurrences. A row of books toppled off a shelf in the living room, landing with a loud crash that echoed through the hallways. A vase slid across the countertop, as if nudged by an invisible hand. Even heavier objects were not immune. One evening, a small wooden chair shifted several feet across the dining room floor while the family sat nearby. Each incident grew more deliberate and forceful, making it clear that some unseen energy was actively disturbing the household. They started faintly, soft thumps that could be mistaken for settling walls. Soon, the knocking became louder, sharper, and more persistent. It often came from empty rooms, sometimes directly behind the family members, echoing as if someone were pacing the house. At night, the sounds intensified, reverberating through hallways and staircases, waking the children and leaving the adults anxious and on edge. The knocks never seemed random. They carried rhythm and purpose, as if summonia or something was communicating, or testing the familiar presence. Disturbed by the escalating events, the Hendersons contacted a team of paranormal investigators. Equipped with EMF meters, thermal cameras, and digital audio recorders, the investigators arrived ready to document the unusual activity. From the moment they entered, the team sensed a heavy, oppressive energy that hung in the air. EMF meters registered erratic spikes in multiple areas, particularly near the living room and kitchen, aligning with the locations of previous disturbances. Temperature readings dropped sharply in certain rooms, creating sudden cold spots that were both uncomfortable and inexplicable, often accompanied by a noticeable chill that seemed to follow the investigators as they moved through the house. Cameras captured shadowy forms moving along walls and corners. In one hallway, a dark, indistinct figure appeared to hover for several seconds before vanishing into the empty space. Another camera recorded the silhouette of a taller shape sliding past the living room doorway, its movement unnatural and deliberate. These figures were never static. They seemed aware of the investigators, retreating when approached yet reappearing moments later. One investigator reported feeling a sudden presence at her side, sensing a weight or obstruction where no one stood. The shadows of persistence suggested intelligence and intent, not random residual energy. Audio recordings further confirmed the haunting. Faint knocks, creaks, and murmurs were captured even when the family and investigators were motionless. Certain devices picked up sounds resembling whispered words, sometimes indistinct, other times eerily clear, though the source could never be identified. At times, these whispers appeared to respond to questions posed by the investigators, reinforcing the impression that the entities within the Elm Street home were interactive and aware of their observers. The Hendersons described a mounting sense of unease and vulnerability. Rooms that should have felt familiar became unpredictable spaces of tension. Objects moved just as the family entered. Chairs shifted slightly when they passed, and doors sometimes slammed on their own. Even walking to the hallways carried the sensation of being watched, as though unseen eyes were following every step. The investigators concluded that the Elm Street home exhibited both residual and interactive paranormal phenomena. Shadowy figures, temperature fluctuations, flying objects, and unexplained knocks indicated an intelligence capable of manipulating the environment. While the exact origin of the activity could not be determined, the pattern suggested entities with a purpose, ones that remained attuned to the movements and emotions of the family. Eventually, the Hendersons made the difficult decision to leave the home. Packing their belongings and departing, they sought refuge in a safer environment, leaving the Elm Street home behind. The house remains on its quiet Dallas street, outwardly peaceful and unchanged. Yet those who visit or pass by often describe cold spots, sudden flickers of light, and an inexplicable feeling of being observed. Inside, shadows continue to shift, knocks echo in empty rooms, and objects remain vulnerable to forces unseen. The Elm Street home endures as a silent witness to a restless energy, a presence both aware and unyielding, waiting quietly for the next family to inhabit its walls. The Willow Brook House in Portland, Oregon, stood quietly along a tree-lined street, its exterior a blend of warm wooden siding and soft, muted colors that gave a welcoming appearance. For the Jensen family, moving in during early autumn felt like the start of a new chapter. The home offered spacious rooms, a cozy fireplace, and large windows that filled the house with natural light. On the surface, it seemed like the perfect suburban retreat. But almost immediately, the Jensens realized that the Willow Brook house held secrets far darker than they could have imagined. The first strange incidents began subtly. Doors would slam without explanation, sometimes during quiet of the day, sometimes in the middle of the night. A kitchen door closed sharply while Mrs. Jensen prepared dinner, startling her and sending a glass tumbling to the floor. At first, the family attempted to rationalize the occurrences, blaming uneven floors, faulty hinges, or the house settling. Other times, the bedroom doors would swing open or shut with enough force to wake the children, even though no windows were open and no one else was in the house. At first, the family attempted to rationalize the occurrences, blaming uneven floors, faulty hinges, or the house settling. But the frequency and intensity of the incidents soon made clear that something else was at work. Soon after, the lights began to flicker unpredictably. Lamps dimmed and brightened without warning, and overhead lights would pulse as if responding to unseen forces. During one evening, the chandelier in the living room stuttered in a rapid, strobing pattern while the family sat quietly watching television. The flickering seemed to follow them from room to room, and in some instances, even when the lamps were unplugged, the glow would shift and shimmer, creating an eerie, unexplainable effect. Objects began to move on their own, adding to the escalating tension. Books slid across tables. Decorative vases tipped over. Small items would lift slightly before falling. One particularly unnerving incident involved a chair in the living room, which slid several feet across the hardwood floor. The familiar cat, usually fearless, bolted from the room. The incidents were not random. They seemed deliberate, almost as if the house were responding to familiar presence or attempting to communicate in a silent, invisible language. Unable to manage the increasingly unsettling activity on their own, the Jensen family called a team of paranormal investigators. The team arrived with EMF meters, thermal cameras, and audio recording equipment, prepared to document the activity in the Willowbrook house. From the moment they stepped inside, the investigators sensed a heavy, charged atmosphere. EMF readings began to spike in the living room, corresponding with reports of the most frequent disturbances. The energy fluctuations were sudden and intense, occurring in patterns that suggested more than residual activity. There appeared to be intelligence behind the movements. Cameras captured orbs of light hovering in the living room and near the stairwell. Some orbs drifted lazily across the room, while others darted sharply, changing direction in ways that seemed responsive to the investigator's presence. The orbs were not reflections or dust particles. They moved with purpose and exhibited behaviors that appeared conscious. During one observation, an orb hovered near a table where a cup had just toppled and then moved across the room before vanishing entirely. The investigators agreed that the light orbs indicated active, intelligent energy within the house. Audio recordings picked up faint murmurs, soft knocks, and occasional low-frequency hums, sometimes coinciding with the movements of objects. At another moment, a sound of footsteps was detected pacing the hallway, even when no one was present. At another moment, a soft whisper was recorded, though its source could not be identified. These auditory phenomena, combined with the visual and electromagnetic anomalies, created an unmistakable impression that the house itself was alive, aware, and interactive. The family described feeling watched constantly. Rooms that should have felt safe became tense and unpredictable spaces. Furniture shifted slightly as they passed by, lights flickered in response to movement, and doors slammed unexpectedly, often leaving them startled and anxious. Even simple tasks like walking to the hallway or entering the kitchen carried a sense of anticipation and fear, as if the house were observing every step and responding deliberately. The investigators concluded that the Willowbrook house exhibited both residual and interactive paranormal activity. The doors, lights, and moving objects were manifestations of an intelligent presence, and the EMF spikes and orbs suggested active energy capable of reacting to the familiar S movements. While they could not determine the origin of the activity, it was clear that the house was not passive. It was aware, deliberate, and persistent. Ultimately, the Jensen family decided to leave the Willowbrook house. Packing their belongings and departing, they sought peace and normalcy elsewhere. The house remains, quietly nestled among Portlanda's leafy streets. Yet those who walk by or enter occasionally report flickering lights, cold drafts, doors opening on their own, and the unmistakable presence of something unseen. Within the walls of the Willowbrook house, the energy continues to linger, active, intelligent, and waiting, a silent witness to all who dare to live inside. The Highland Avenue residence in Baltimore, Maryland, was a charming two-story home with a brick FAA Section A tall windows and a welcoming porch that reflected the character of the historic neighborhood. For the Thompson family, moving in felt like a fresh start. They imagined peaceful evenings, family dinners, and laughter echoing through the halls. But it didn't take long for them to realize that their new home was far from ordinary. Within days of moving in, unusual occurrences began to unsettle the family, and slowly escalated into events that defied explanation. The first strange phenomenon involved phantom footsteps. Initially, the sounds were faint, barely audible above the normal creaks of an old house. The family assumed it was a house settling or a neighbor moving about, but the steps were distinct and deliberate. Mrs. Thompson reported hearing footsteps ascending and descending the staircase when the house was completely empty. These sounds carried a weight and rhythm that suggested a presence aware of the familiar S movements, almost as if something unseen was tracking them from room to room. Soon, objects began to behave unpredictably. Small items, such as books and decorative pieces, shifted across tables and shelves without explanation. A cup on the kitchen counter lifted slightly before falling to the floor, shattering with an audible crash. Even heavier items, like chairs, seemed to slide slightly across the floor when no one was nearby. The family tried to rationalize these occurrences, blaming vibrations or drafts, but the repeated, intentional nature of the movements defied any logical explanation. Cupboards also became active. Doors would swing open as if someone had just reached inside, and then close abruptly, often startling family members. One morning, Mrs. Thompson entered the kitchen to find a cabinet where she kept dishes wide open, though no one had been in the room. Another time, a drawer slowly slid open while Mr. Thompson was making coffee, stopping midway as if paused by an invisible hand before sliding back into place. The cupboard disturbances seemed deliberate, almost playful, yet carried a distinctly unsettling energy. The family began to notice a growing sense of coldness in certain areas of the house. Rooms that should have been warm and inviting suddenly felt icy. Chill spots appearing near the stairs, hallways, and corners of living spaces. The cold often accompanied other phenomena, such as objects moving or doors opening. It was as though the energy within the house was concentrated in specific areas, creating an environment that was both physically uncomfortable and psychologically unsettling. Unable to cope with the constant disturbances, the Thompsons reached out to a team of paranormal investigators. Equipped with EMF meters, thermal cameras, and digital audio devices, the investigators arrived determined to document the phenomena. From the moment they stepped inside, the team noted that the atmosphere carried a tangible heaviness, as if the house itself was aware of their presence. EMF readings spiked unpredictably in the kitchen and living room, coinciding with locations where the family had reported activity. Cold spots registered on thermal cameras, and investigators frequently felt abrupt temperature drops that could not be explained by drafts or weather. Cameras captured shadowy figures moving with what appeared to be intelligence. In one hallway, a dark silhouette lingered in a corner before following an investigator's movement and then disappearing into the wall. Another shadow, vaguely humanoid in form, was observed gliding along the living room floor, its movement smooth and deliberate, as if watching and reacting to humans in the room. Investigators noted that these shadows were not random. They moved in patterns that suggested awareness, almost as if the presence was evaluating the family and its surroundings. Audio recordings confirmed additional phenomena. Faint murmurs and soft footsteps echoed in empty rooms, sometimes coinciding with cupboard doors swinging open or objects being displaced. Investigations also recorded subtle sounds that resembled whispered words, unintelligible but clearly purposeful, suggesting an interactive presence rather than a simple residual haunting. The combination of visual, auditory, and physical disturbances pointed to an intelligent force operating within the Highland Avenue residence. The family described living in constant tension. Simple actions like walking through hallways or entering the kitchen carried anxiety. As they never knew whether a cupboard might open on its own, a shadow might follow them, or the air would suddenly turn icy. Even with investigators present, the phenomena persisted, confirming that the activity was not limited to familiar as imagination or isolated incidents. After reviewing the collected evidence, the investigators concluded that the Highland Avenue residence exhibited both residual and interactive paranormal activity. While the origin of the activity could not be definitively determined, the combination of auditory, visual, and physical manifestations suggested a conscious, intelligent force interacting with the home's occupants. Ultimately, the Thompsons decided to leave the home. They packed their belongings and moved, seeking peace and normalcy elsewhere, leaving the Highland Avenue residence behind. The house remains on its historic Baltimore street, calm and unassuming to the casual observer. Yet those who enter often report cold spots, objects moving independently, and shadows appearing in corners with an intelligence that cannot be ignored. The Highland Avenue residence endures, its present alive, aware, and waiting silently within its walls. The Cedar Grove house in Cleveland, Ohio, was the type of home that caught the eye with its stately brick exterior, large bay windows, and a tree-lined yard that suggested tranquility. For the Reynolds family, moving in felt like a dream realized. Spacious rooms, a welcoming kitchen, and a quiet neighborhood offered the promise of a peaceful life. Yet, almost immediately, the house revealed a far darker side, one that would gradually turn the familiar sense of security into unease and fear. A decorative vase tipped over while Mrs. Reynolds walked past, landing in shards across the floor. But soon, items began moving with more force. Books and trinkets flew from shelves, sometimes across entire rooms, crashing into walls and floors. Heavy objects, including chairs, slid across the hardwood floors on their own, as if propelled by an unseen hand. Doors became another source of fear. The disturbances seemed deliberate, coordinated, and often targeted areas where the family spent the most time. Cupboard cabinets and room doors would slam shut with loud, startling force. The sound reverberated through the house, often startling the children awake at night. At times, the doors slammed repeatedly, creating a rhythm that felt purposeful, almost as though the house itself was trying to communicate. The unpredictability of these events left the family feeling constantly on edge. The auditory phenomena were equally disturbing. On more than one occasion, Mr. Reynolds approached a closed door only to have it swing open suddenly, causing him to stumble backward. Family members began hearing whispers, soft but clear, in rooms where no one else was present. Moans would echo through hallways late at night, low and mournful, sending chills down the spine. Footsteps could be heard pacing from room to room, distinct and deliberate, yet entirely devoid of any visible presence. Children described feeling as though someone near or something was following them, footsteps echoing just behind their own. Even when the family remained together, the house seemed to hum with unseen activity, filling the rooms with oppressive energy. Unable to cope with the escalating disturbances, the Reynolds family sought help from a team of paranormal investigators. Equipped with EMF meters, thermal cameras, motion sensors, and audio recording devices, the team began a series of observations and documentation sessions. From the first visit, investigators noticed significant fluctuations in electromagnetic fields in multiple rooms, particularly in areas where the family had reported the most activity. Cold spots were detected in the hallways, living room, and master bedroom, often coinciding with doors slamming or objects moving independently. Cameras captured objects in motion that could not be explained by drafts or vibration. A chair was recorded sliding across the dining room floor, while investigators stood in the kitchen. A stack of books lifted and toppled with no visible cause. These movements were deliberate, consistent with the familiar-esque reports of targeted disturbances, and often seemed to react to the presence of people in the rooms. Audio recordings revealed whispers, moans, and footsteps, matching the familiar-esque descriptions. Investigators confirmed the sounds even when no one was in the immediate vicinity. One recording captured a series of whispered words that could not be deciphered, followed by the unmistakable rhythm of someone walking across the hardwood floor. In several instances, the investigators reported hearing faint groans or moaning sounds that appeared to emanate from walls or corners of empty rooms. The Reynolds family described living in a constant state of vigilance. Rooms that should have felt safe became unpredictable and tense. A simple trip to the kitchen might be accompanied by a chair sliding slightly out of place or a door slamming just behind them. Even mundane tasks were shadowed by the knowledge that the house was active and aware, with a presence that seemed intelligent and capable of interacting with the family. The children avoided certain rooms at night, fearful of the shadows and the mysterious noises that seemed to follow them. Investigators concluded that the Cedar Grove house exhibited both residual and interactive paranormal activity. Objects moving independently, doors slamming, and audible phenomena such as whispers, moans, and footsteps indicated an intelligent presence capable of responding to familiar-esque movements. While the origin of the activity remained unknown, the consistency and intensity of the disturbances confirmed that the house was not merely haunted by residual energy, but by a force that remained aware and active. Ultimately, the Reynolds family decided to leave the Cedar Grove house. Packing their belongings, they sought refuge in a home that offered stability and peace. The house itself remains, quietly situated on its Cleveland Street, its exterior calm and seemingly ordinary. Yet those who pass by or enter occasionally report sudden movements of objects, doors slamming with no cause, and the sound of footsteps echoing in empty hallways. Inside the Cedar Grove house, a presence in duress restless, intelligent, and unyielding, still interacting with the walls and rooms, waiting silently for those who dare to live within its confines. The Maple Grove residence in San Francisco, California, was a charming Victorian home, its exterior painted in soft hues of cream and green, nestled among a row of historic houses on a quiet, tree-lined street. For the Lopez family, moving in felt like the perfect opportunity to embrace a new chapter in their lives. The neighborhood offered a sense of community. However, it soon became evident that the Maple Grove residents held a presence far from ordinary, a force that would transform their sense of home into one of unease and fear. The first signs of unusual activity were subtle, almost easy to dismiss. The television would continue to turn on unexpectedly, sometimes switching channels, other times powering off abruptly. Soon, other electronics began acting unpredictably. Lamps would flicker or pulse, and ceiling lights would dim and brighten without explanation. Within days, the phenomena escalated. Objects began to move without contact. A coffee mug lifted slightly off the counter before falling and breaking. Decorative figurines shifted across shelves, and framed photographs tilted at odd angles. More alarming were the instances of furniture shaking. One night, the sofa trembled violently while the family was seated nearby, causing them to leap back in shock. Chairs and tables vibrated or slid across hardwood floors, seemingly propelled by invisible hands. These disturbances were not random. They appeared deliberate, often occurring when the family entered a room or approached specific objects. Soft thuds and knocks echoed through the house, sometimes coming from upstairs rooms or empty hallways. Family members began hearing footsteps pacing behind them, even when no one was present. Whispered voices became increasingly common, calling out names or speaking unintelligible words that sent shivers down their spines. The children would occasionally freeze mid-activity, staring at corners or walls as if they could see something unseen, describing shadows moving in ways that defied explanation. Realizing that their experiences were far beyond the ordinary, the Lopez family contacted a team of paranormal investigators. The team arrived with EMF meters, thermal cameras, and audio recording devices, prepared to document the activity. From the moment they stepped inside, investigators noticed an oppressive energy lingering in the air, particularly in the living room and hallway. EMF readings spiked dramatically in multiple areas, coincided with the locations where the family reported the most activity. Temperature fluctuations were frequent, with sudden drops that chilled the investigators even in well-heated rooms. Cameras captured shadowy figures moving across the rooms, their forms indistinct but unmistakably humanoid. In one hallway, a dark silhouette appeared to follow the investigators as they moved from room to room, vanishing when approached. In the living room, another shadow hovered near the fireplace before retreating into the corner, its movements deliberate and responsive. Investigators reported feeling a tangible presence, as if being observed by something unseen, intelligent, and aware of their actions. Audio devices captured more than just knocks and footsteps. Whispered phrases and murmurs were recorded in empty rooms, sometimes overlapping, sometimes in a sequence that suggested communication. Investigators noted that the sound seemed to correspond with the timing of objects moving or furniture shaking, creating the impression of an entity actively engaging with those inside. One particularly chilling moment occurred when a stack of books lifted off a shelf as a low murmur echoed through the living room, ending abruptly when an investigator approached the area. The Lopez family described a growing sense of fear and tension. Rooms that should have felt safe became unpredictable and charged with energy. Even simple activities like walking to the hallway or entering the kitchen were accompanied by anxiety, as objects moved or lights flickered in ways that seemed responsive to their presence. The children avoided certain areas at night, fearful of shadows or sudden noises. Adults felt a persistent weight, a sense of being watched by something that existed just beyond the edge of perception. Investigators concluded that the Maple Grove residence displayed both residual and interactive paranormal activity. The television turning on, objects flying, furniture shaking, and shadowy figures indicated the presence of an intelligent force capable of interacting with the environment and its occupants. The activity was not random or residual alone. It appeared to respond to familiar actions and movements, suggesting awareness and intent behind each disturbance. Ultimately, the Lopez family decided to leave the Maple Grove residence. They packed their belongings and moved to a location that offered peace and normalcy. Yet the house remains on its quiet San Francisco street, outwardly serene, its historic charm unchanged. Those who enter or pass by occasionally report lights flickering, objects shifting, or shadows moving at the periphery of vision. Within the walls of the Maple Grove residence, the unseen presence endures, active and aware, silently observing, and interacting with any who dare to enter its rooms. The Oak Ridge House in Nashville, Tennessee, sat quietly on a tree-lined street, its red brick FA sectionade and white trim windows giving an inviting suburban charm. For the Harris family, moving in felt like the start of a new chapter. The home offered spacious rooms, hardwood floors, and a large kitchen perfect for family gatherings. At first, everything seemed ideal. But soon after settling in, the Harris family began to notice events that could not be explained by ordinary circumstances, events that would turn their dream home into a place of unease. The disturbances began subtly. But soon after settling in, the Harris family began to notice events that could not be explained by ordinary circumstances, events that would turn their dream home into a place of unease. Cups would shift slightly on the counter, as if nudged by an invisible hand. Dishes sometimes topple from the table without anyone nearby. At first, the Harris family assumed these incidents were caused by uneven surfaces or careless handling. But the frequency and intensity soon ruled out simple accidents. Objects of all sizes seemed to move without cause. Chairs slid across the hardwood floor, books tipped over on shelves. And even heavier furniture occasionally appeared to have been repositioned when no one had touched it. Alongside the physical phenomena, voices began to echo through the home. Initially, they were faint murmurs, barely distinguishable from the normal creaks and groans of an old house. But soon, the whispers became clearer. Family members reported hearing their names called, or hearing phrases spoken in soft, unintelligible tones, seemingly coming from empty rooms. Sometimes the voices overlapped, creating an unsettling chorus that made it impossible to ignore. The children began to fear walking through hallways alone, claiming that the voices seemed to follow them from room to room. Realizing that the activity was escalating, the Harris family called in a team of paranormal investigators. Equipped with EMF meters, thermal cameras, and audio recording devices, the team set out to document the unusual occurrences in the Oak Ridge house. From the moment they entered, investigators reported feeling a heavy, charged energy in the air. EMF meters registered spikes in multiple rooms, particularly in the living room and dining areas, correlating with the locations where objects had moved or voices had been heard. Cold spots were detected intermittently, often preceding or coinciding with the movement of furniture or dishes. Cameras captured orbs of light appearing and drifting through the rooms, sometimes moving rapidly, other times hovering silently in corners or near the ceiling. Investigators noted that these orbs were not reflections or dust particles. They moved with intent, responding to the presence of the team. In one instance, an orb hovered over the dining table moments before a chair slid across the floor, suggesting a direct interaction between the unseen force and the investigators. Shadow figures were also observed repeatedly. In one hallway, a dark silhouette appeared, its edges blurry but unmistakably human in shape. It moved deliberately along the wall, disappearing when approached and reappearing in a different location seconds later. Disappearing when approached and reappearing in a different location seconds later. In the living room, another shadow lingered near a window before vanishing entirely. The devices picked up whispers and murmurings in empty rooms, often coinciding with objects moving or furniture shifting. At times, the voices were indistinct, forming words that could not be fully understood. At other times, names were clearly audible, echoing through hallways and staircases. Investigators observed that the sound seemed to interact with the environment, sometimes following a question or movement, further suggesting that the presence within the home was conscious and aware. The Harris family described living in a constant state of tension, Everyday activities became unpredictable and fraught with anxiety. Entering the kitchen, for instance, could trigger dishes falling or chairs moving without warning. Walking down the hallway at night brought the sense of being watched, with whispers following their movements and shadows appearing in corners. The children avoided certain rooms entirely, fearing the combination of moving objects, whispering voices, and the chilling presence that seemed to linger throughout the house. The investigators concluded that the Oak Ridge house displayed both residual and interactive paranormal activity. The combination of objects moving independently, shadow figures appearing, orbs of light, and voices emanating from empty rooms suggested a conscious and responsive presence. While the origin of the phenomena could not be determined, the evidence pointed to a force that was active, aware, and capable of interacting with the family. The combination of objects moving independently, shadow figures appearing, orbs of light, and voices emanating from empty rooms suggested a conscious and responsive presence. Ultimately, the Harris family made the difficult decision to leave the Oak Ridge house. They packed their belongings and moved elsewhere, seeking a home that offered peace and security. The Oak Ridge house remains on its quiet Nashville street, outwardly calm and ordinary. Yet those who pass by or enter occasionally report objects moving on their own, sudden cold spots, or the appearance of orbs and shadows. Within its walls, the unseen presence endures, active, aware, and quietly interactive with all who dare to inhabit its spaces. The Pinecrest Lane residence in Detroit, Michigan, was a charming, two-story home nestled on a quiet suburban street. Its red brick exterior, large front porch, and neatly trimmed lawn gave it a welcoming appearance. For the Morgan family, moving in promised a fresh start, a place to settle down, raise their children, and create lasting memories. However, it did not take long for the Morgans to realize that their new house held disturbances far beyond ordinary explanation. The first unsettling incidents were subtle but alarming. Objects began moving on their own. A coffee mug would lift slightly from the kitchen counter and crash to the floor. Books slid across shelves without warning. Decorative items were displaced in ways that suggested force rather than gravity. At first, the family attempted to rationalize these events. Perhaps the house was settling, or perhaps they had been careless with placement. But over time, the disturbances grew more intense and frequent. Objects flew across rooms, landing with force that startled anyone nearby. Chairs slid along the hardwood floors, lamps toppled, and even heavier furniture shifted in ways that could not be explained by drafts or vibrations. Lights began to flicker unpredictably. Lamps dimmed and brightened without warning. And overhead lights pulsed as if responding to the presence of some Ania or something in the room. In one particularly chilling incident, the chandelier above the dining table flickered violently during dinner, casting jagged shadows across the walls and ceiling. The flickering persisted even when the lights were turned off, leaving the family in darkness punctuated by brief, erratic bursts of light. The combined effect of flying objects and flickering lights made the house feel alive, charged with a restless energy that was impossible to ignore. Doors became another source of fear. Cupboards, closet doors, and room entrances opened and closed without explanation. Some slammed suddenly, creating a loud, jarring noise that echoed through the hallways. The family reported instances in which doors would swing open as they approached, only to shut abruptly when they tried to enter the room, as if the unseen force were tracking their movements. Voices echoed through the house, sometimes calling the family members by name. Even when no one was present, the Morgans reported hearing conversations, distant footsteps, and occasional low moans. Mrs. Morgan often felt the sensation of being to a cold, fleeting contact on her arm or shoulder despite being alone in a room. Unable to manage the increasingly alarming activity, the Morgans sought help from a team of paranormal investigators. Equipped with EMF meters, thermal cameras, and audio recording devices, the team documented the disturbances over multiple visits. From the moment they entered the Pinecrest Lane residence, investigators sensed a heavy, charged energy in the air. EMF meters recorded erratic spikes in the living room, kitchen, and hallways, corresponding with areas where the family reported the most frequent activity. Temperature fluctuations were significant, with sudden cold spots forming in empty rooms, often coinciding with moments when doors or objects moved. Chairs slid across floors, books fell from shelves, and decorative items toppled without physical contact. Orbs of light appeared on infrared cameras, drifting through rooms before disappearing abruptly. Shadowy figures were also recorded, lingering in corners or hallways and vanishing when approached. Investigators reported feeling the presence of intelligent energy, noting that the activity was not random but seemingly interactive, responded both the family and the investigative team. Audio devices confirmed the Morganza experiences. Whispers and distant voices were picked up in empty rooms, sometimes overlapping, sometimes distinct. Footsteps could be heard pacing hallways, and low moans were captured in areas where no human presence existed. In several instances, investigators noted that the sound seemed timed with the movement of objects, suggesting that the phenomena were not residual but intelligent and reactive. The family described living in constant tension. Ordinary activities became fraught with fear, as the house seemed aware of their movements. Walking down hallways, entering the kitchen, or even sitting quietly in the living room could trigger objects flying, lights flickering, or the sensation of being touched. Walking down hallways, entering the kitchen, or even sitting quietly in the living room could trigger objects flying, lights flickering, or the sensation of being touched. Walking down hallways, entering the kitchen, or even sitting quietly in the living room could trigger objects flying, lights flickering, or the sensation of being touched. The children avoided certain rooms at night, fearful of shadows, strange noises, and cold touches. Even during the day, the atmosphere in the house carried a sense of unease, as though the walls themselves were aware of the familiar presence. Even during the day, the atmosphere in the house carried a sense of unease, as though the walls themselves were aware of the familiar presence. Even during the day, the atmosphere in the house carried a sense of unease, as though the walls themselves were aware of the familiar presence. Investigators concluded that the Pinecrest Lane residence displayed both residual and interactive paranormal activity. The combination of moving objects, flickering lights, doors opening and closing independently, orbs, shadow figures, and audible phenomena indicated a conscious presence capable of interacting with the family. While the source of the activity remained undetermined, the evidence pointed to an intelligent, persistent energy inhabiting the home. Ultimately, the Morgans decided to leave the Pinecrest Lane residence. They packed their belongings and moved to a safer, quieter home, seeking normalcy and peace. The house remains on its quiet Detroit street, outwardly calm and ordinary. Yet those who enter occasionally report sudden flickering lights, objects moving without contact, doors slamming, and whispers echoing through empty rooms. Within its walls, the unseen presence endures, active, aware, and silently observing any who dare to step inside the Pinecrest Lane residence. The Birch Lane house in St. Louis, Missouri, was a charming two-story home with a brick exterior, wide windows, and a small front porch that gave a welcoming, suburban feel. For the Lawson family, moving in felt like the start of a new chapter. The house offered spacious rooms, hardwood floors, and plenty of sunlight streaming to the large windows. At first, everything seemed ideal. Yet, within weeks, the Lawsons began to notice that their new home held a presence far beyond ordinary, something that would slowly turn the comforting space into a place of unease and fear. The first signs of unusual activity were subtle but unsettling. Furniture began shifting without explanation. A chair in the living room would appear several feet from where it had been left, and sometimes tables seemed to tilt slightly as if nudged by an invisible force. But the incidents became increasingly frequent and unmistakable. Heavy furniture moved, books toppled from shelves, and items once carefully arranged were found in disarray with no human interference. Objects began disappearing entirely, only to reappear in unusual places. A set of keys vanished from the kitchen counter, later found on a shelf in the bedroom. A small vase disappeared from the living room, only to be discovered inside a drawer hours later. Even mundane actions, like setting down a cup or placing a book on a table, could lead to an unexpected disappearance or movement within minutes. Mirrors became a particularly disturbing focal point of activity. On several occasions, The reflective surfaces would fog, as if someone had breathed on them, even when the room was warm and dry. Sometimes the fog would form vague shapes, fleeting patterns that resembled figures or faces. The Lawsons described instances where they looked into mirrors and felt as though they were being watched, sensing movement behind the reflective surface that vanished the moment they turned around. The mirrors, once ordinary household items, became portals of unease, amplifying a sense of an intelligent presence within the home. Unable to manage the escalating disturbances, the Lawsons contacted a team of paranormal investigators. Equipped with EMF meters, thermal cameras, and digital audio recorders, the team conducted multiple sessions in the Birch Lane house. From the moment they entered, investigators sensed a charge, heavy energy that seemed to cling to the walls and corners. EMF meters recorded spikes in several rooms, particularly the living room, hallway, and master bedroom. Temperature readings indicated sudden cold spots, often coinciding with the movement of furniture or the appearance of fog on mirrors. Cameras captured shadows moving independently. In one hallway, a dark, humanoid shape slid along the wall before retreating into a corner. Another shadow appeared near the staircase, pausing as if observing the investigators, before vanishing entirely. These figures did not behave randomly. Their movements appeared deliberate, tracking the presence of both the family and the investigators. One team member reported the sensation of being followed, feeling the weight of the unseen form moving just beyond the edge of perception. Audio recordings further confirmed the activity. Faint murmurs, whispers, and occasional creaks were detected in empty rooms. Investigators captured sounds that resembled low voices interacting with the family, responding to questions or movements. On several occasions, objects moved or disappeared immediately after an audio cue, creating a connection between the unseen presence and its environment. The evidence pointed to an entity capable of interacting with the family and the investigators in real time, displaying intelligence and awareness. The Lawson family described living in a constant state of tension. Rooms that should have felt safe became unpredictable and unsettling. Sitting in the living room could result in a sudden shift of the couch or an item falling from a shelf. Walking through hallways at night carried the sense of being watched, with shadows lingering just beyond vision. The children began avoiding certain rooms, fearful of the fogging mirrors and objects moving without explanation. Everyday routines were overshadowed by the anticipation of another unexplained event. Investigators concluded that the Birch Lane house exhibited both residual and interactive paranormal activity. The movement of furniture, disappearing objects, fogging mirrors, and shadow figures indicated a conscious presence capable of observing and responding to the family. While the source of the activity could not be definitively determined, the phenomena suggested an intelligent, persistent energy that remained active within the home. Ultimately, the Lawson family decided to leave the Birch Lane house. They packed their belongings and moved elsewhere, seeking peace and normalcy. The house remains on its quiet St. Louis Street, its exterior calm and unassuming. Yet those who enter occasionally report furniture moving, objects vanishing, mirrors fogging mysteriously, and shadows that shift independently. Within the walls of the Birch Lane house, the unseen presence endures, aware, interactive, and silently observing anyone who dares to live within its rooms. The Willow Street home in Las Vegas, Nevada, was an elegant two-story house with a stucco exterior, arched windows, and a neatly landscaped front yard. To the Martinez family, moving in promised a fresh start. The home was spacious, well-lit, and filled with charm. At first, life in the Willow Street home seemed perfect. However, within days, the family began experiencing events that defied explanation, events that would transform their dream house into a place of constant unease and fear. The first incidents were subtle, almost easy to dismiss. Objects began shifting without contact. A coffee mug on the kitchen counter would tilt slightly and then fall, spilling its contents across the floor. Books slid across shelves or tumbled to the ground. At first, the family assumed it was their imagination, or perhaps minor accidents as they settled into their new home. But soon, the movements became more frequent and deliberate. Decorative items, small appliances, and even heavier pieces of furniture were found in different positions, often after being carefully placed earlier. It became evident that the activity was not random. Lights began flickering unpredictably, intensifying a growing sense of unease. Overhead lights dimmed and brightened with no explanation. Lamps pulsed or switched on and off, and ceiling fixtures would stutter violently. One evening, the living room chandelier flickered so intensely that the family had to leave the room, the intermittent illumination creating eerie patterns that seemed to move with the family. The flickering lights often coincided with objects moving or sudden temperature drops, adding a physical, unsettling dimension to the activity. Phantom footsteps soon joined the disturbances. At first, the sounds were faint, echoing through hallways and staircases late at night. The family initially attributed them to the settling of the house or neighbors. But the steps became unmistakably deliberate, pacing back and forth with weight and rhythm. Children would wake screaming, convinced that someone was walking through their rooms. Even during the day, family members reported hearing steps following them, echoing from empty rooms or hallways. The sounds create a constant sense of being watched, of an unseen presence moving throughout the home. Unable to cope with the escalating activity, the Martinez family contacted a team of paranormal investigators. Equipped with EMF meters, thermal cameras, and audio recording devices, the team began documenting the disturbances over multiple visits. From the moment they entered, investigators noted a charged atmosphere, a heavy energy that seemed to cling to the walls and corners. EMF meters recorded erratic spikes in the living room, kitchen, and hallways, matching the locations where the family reported the most activity. Temperature readings indicated sudden cold spots, often coinciding with the movement of objects or flickering lights. In one hallway, a dark silhouette lingered in a corner before gliding along the wall and vanishing. In the living room, another shadow appeared near a doorway, seeming to watch the investigators as they moved, then disappearing when approached. These figures did not behave randomly. Their movements were deliberate, suggesting intelligence and awareness. One investigator reported feeling a sudden presence close by, as if something unseen were standing just beyond reach. Audio recordings further confirmed the familiar-esque experiences. Faint murmurs, whispers, and soft knocks were picked up in empty rooms. Investigators recorded the sound of footsteps pacing hallways when no one was present. At times, the noises seemed to correspond directly with objects moving or lights flickering, reinforcing the impression that the presence was interactive, aware, and deliberately responding to its surroundings. The Martinez family described a growing sense of fear and unease. Rooms that should have felt safe became unpredictable and tense. A simple walk down the hallway could trigger a chair sliding or a light flickering. Sitting in the living room might coincide with mug tipping from a counter or the sensation of cold air sweeping past. The children avoided certain rooms at night, fearful of shadows, flickering lights, and phantom footsteps. Adults felt constantly watched, sensing the presence of something unseen monitoring their movements throughout the home. Investigators concluded that the Willow Street home exhibited both residual and interactive paranormal activity. Objects moving independently, lights flickering, phantom footsteps, shadow figures, and unexplained energy spikes all indicated a conscious presence capable of interacting with the family and investigators. While the source of phenomena remained undetermined, the evidence pointed to a persistent, intelligent energy inhabiting the home. Ultimately, the Martinez family decided to leave the Willow Street home. They packed their belongings and relocated to a safer environment, seeking peace and normalcy. The house remains on its quiet Las Vegas street, outwardly calm and ordinary. Yet those who enter occasionally report lights flickering, objects moving without explanation, phantom footsteps echoing through empty rooms, and shadowy figures appearing at the periphery of vision. Within its walls, the unseen presence in Durisa active, aware, and silently observing anyone who dares to step inside the Willow Street home. The Magnolia Lane residence in Washington, D.C. was a stately, two-story home with a classic brick FAA sectionade, large windows, and manicured front yard. For the Bennett family, Moving in represented a fresh start. Spacious rooms, a modern kitchen, and high ceilings promised comfort and warmth. At first, life in the house seemed ideal, filled with laughter and family gatherings. Yet, within weeks, the family began experiencing occurrences that defied explanation, slowly revealing that the Magnolia Lane residence was far from an ordinary home. The first unsettling signs were subtle but disturbing. Chairs in the dining room would shift slightly after meals, as if nudged by invisible hands. The family attributed it to uneven flooring or accidental bumps, but the frequency and precision of the movements soon made it impossible to ignore. Soon, doors began slamming on their own, sometimes in the middle of the night, echoing through the halls. Cupboards and drawers would open abruptly, often startling the family when they entered rooms. These events became more intense over time, creating a constant sense of unease. Objects began to fly across rooms with alarming force. Small decorative items were the first to move. A vase tipped off a table and shattered. A picture frame slid across the hardwood floor. Soon, heavier objects, including chairs and side tables, shifted or toppled over, leaving the family increasingly frightened. The movements were not random. The objects seemed to target areas where family members were present, giving the impression that the house itself was aware of their presence. Alongside the physical disturbances came auditory phenomena. Whispered voices echoed through empty rooms, sometimes calling family members by name. The children often reported hearing soft laughter, low and eerie, as if someone unseen was observing them. These sounds would occur without any discernible source, filling the hallways and rooms at times when the house was otherwise silent. Footsteps were frequently heard pacing upstairs or across hallways, matching no ONES movement, creating a persistent sensation of being watched. The Bennett family soon realized they could no longer manage the activity alone and contacted a team of paranormal investigators. Equipped with EMF meters, thermal cameras, and audio recording devices, the team conducted multiple sessions in the Magnolia Lane residence. From the moment they entered, investigators noted a heavy, charged energy lingering in the air, particularly in rooms where the family reported the most disturbances. EMF readings spiked unpredictably in the living room, dining area, and bedrooms. Cold spots were also detected, often coinciding with objects moving or doors slamming. Cameras captured shadowy figures moving independently through rooms. In one hallway, a dark silhouette lingered, shifting its position as investigators approached. In the living room, another shadow moved deliberately near a window, fading when someone stepped closer. These figures did not behave randomly. Their movements appeared purposeful, responsive to the presence of both the investigators and the family. One investigator reported feeling a sudden pressure on his shoulder, though no one was near him, reinforcing the sense of intelligent, interactive energy. Audio recordings provided further evidence of the Hauntings activity. Faint whispers, murmurs, and eerie laughter were picked up in empty rooms. Investigators noted that the sounds often coincided with objects moving or doors slamming. In several instances, items shifted immediately after a whisper or laugh was detected, suggesting that the phenomena were not residual but actively engaging with the family. The interactions appeared focused, as if the presence was aware of who was in each room and was intentionally targeting certain family members. The children avoided certain rooms at night, fearful of the whispers and laughter that seemed to follow them. Ordinary activities became fraught with anxiety, as even walking through hallways or entering the kitchen could trigger chairs moving, objects flying, or doors slamming. Adults felt a continuous sense of being watched, with shadows and unseen forces reacting to their presence. The home, once a place of comfort, became unpredictable and unnerving. Investigators concluded that the Magnolia Lane residence exhibited both residual and interactive paranormal activity. The combination of chairs moving independently, doors slamming, objects flying, whispers, laughter, and shadowy figures indicated the presence of an intelligent force capable of observing and interacting with the family. While the source of the activity could not be determined, the evidence suggested a conscious, persistent energy inhabiting the home, actively targeting those inside. Ultimately, the Bennett family made the difficult decision to leave the Magnolia Lane residence. They packed their belongings and moved to a home that offered peace and normalcy. The house remains on its quiet Washington, D.C. street, appearing outwardly calm and unassuming. Yet those who enter occasionally report chairs moving without contact, doors slamming, objects flying, whispers echoing through empty rooms, and shadows that seem to follow their movements. Within the walls of the Magnolia Lane residence, the unseen presence in Durisa, aware, interactive, and silently observing anyone who dares to live within its rooms. The Cedar Avenue house in New York State was a spacious, two-story home with traditional FAA section ade, wide windows, and a welcoming front porch. To the Harper family, moving in represented a fresh start, a place to settle down and create lasting memories. The home was filled with light, had large, open rooms, and a backyard perfect for children to play. Yet, within weeks, the family began to notice events that defied explanation, slowly transforming their home from a sanctuary into a source of unease and fear. The first unusual incidents were subtle. Objects seemed to shift on their own. Books would slide from shelves, cups would tip slightly before falling to the floor, and small decorative items were found in different locations than where they had been placed. Initially, the family attributed these occurrences to forgetfulness or minor accidents, but the frequency and intensity quickly ruled out simple explanations. Soon, heavier furniture began to move independently. Chairs slid across the hardwood floors, tables shifted, and even a dresser was found slightly angled in a room where it had previously stood straight against the wall. The movements appeared deliberate, often happening when the family entered a room or approached certain objects. Doors became another unsettling focus of activity. Cupboards, closets, and room doors would open on their own, sometimes swinging wide with a loud crash. Sometimes doors would slam shut suddenly, creating a jarring sound that echoed through the hallways. Family members reported instances where they would enter a room only to find the door moving, as if something unseen were testing their presence. These occurrences heightened the tension in the home, leaving the Harpers wary of walking through rooms alone, especially at night. Alongside the physical activity, the family experienced auditory phenomena. Whispers echoed through empty rooms, faint at first, but gradually increasing in intensity. At times, the whispers seemed to form words, calling family members by name, while at other moments there remained unintelligible murmurs. The children described hearing voices in hallways or from rooms that were entirely vacant, and sometimes reported sensing a presence following them. The combination of moving objects, shifting furniture, and whispered voices created a constant feeling of being observed. Unable to manage the disturbances on their own, the Harper family contacted a team of paranormal investigators. Equipped with EMF meters, thermal cameras, and audio recording devices, the team conducted multiple sessions in the Cedar Avenue house. From the moment they entered, investigators sensed a heavy energy in the air, a charged atmosphere that seemed to cling to the corners and hallways. EMF meters recorded significant spikes in multiple rooms, often coincided with locations where objects had moved or doors had opened independently. Cold spots appeared intermittently, especially in the living room, dining area, and hallways, often preceding or accompanying phenomena. Cameras captured shadowy figures moving with purpose. In one hallway, a dark silhouette lingered near a corner before gliding across the floor and vanishing into a wall. Another shadow appeared near a doorway, observing investigators and then retreating when approached. These figures were not random. Their movement suggested awareness, as if the presence was actively monitoring both the family and the investigative team. One investigator described feeling a sudden chill and the impression that the shadow was watching him think, an experience echoed by other team members. Audio devices further confirmed the familiar-esque experiences. Disembodied whispers, murmurs, and faint footsteps were detected in empty rooms, often coincided with objects moving or furniture shifting, suggesting that the activity was interactive rather than residual. In several instances, items moved immediately after a whisper or soft sound was recorded, reinforcing the impression of an intelligent force at work within the house. The Harper family described living in a constant state of tension. Simple activities like walking through a hallway or sitting in the living room became fraught with anxiety. Objects would levitate or topple. Without warning, doors would open or slam, and the whispers would follow them from room to room. The children avoided certain areas at night, fearful of shadows or sudden movements. Even during the day, the atmosphere felt heavy and charged, as if the walls themselves were alive and aware of their presence. Investigators concluded that the Cedar Avenue house exhibited both residual and interactive paranormal activity. The combination of levitating objects, moving furniture, doors opening independently, disembodied whispers, and shadowy figures indicated the presence of a conscious force capable of observing and interacting with the family. While the origin of the activity remained undetermined, the evidence suggested an intelligent, persistent energy inhabiting the home. Ultimately, the Harper family decided to leave the Cedar Avenue house. They packed their belongings and moved to a safer, more predictable environment, seeking peace and normalcy. The house remains on its quiet New York street, outwardly calm and ordinary. Yet those who enter occasionally report objects moving on their own, doors swinging open, cold spots, shadowy figures, and whispers that seem to respond to the living. Within the walls of the Cedar Avenue house, the unseen presence in Durisa, aware, intelligent, and silently observing anyone who dares to inhabit its rooms. These 25 real poltergeist activities remind us that sometimes the home is not a place of safety. Objects move, voices call, and shadows